Hey there everybody, this is Killin' Cat, but you can call me Patrick, and trust me, that's okay, everyone does. I played this with my wifey, and the first thing we noticed is the font is essentially papyrus. It's a little funny, they couldn't even make their own font for this or something. Or if they did make their own font, it's almost an already existing font. Anyways, to start off, I like this game. And I like Breath of the Wild. It's a fun game, so is the predecessor. I'm writing this review mostly as I go along, so some spoilers will be ahead, some major and some minor. There will also be some addressing to things I've seen in online forums and from fans. I'll also be addressing some of the honestly terrible and great fan interactions I've had about this title. Some people made my experience with this game genuinely worse by screaming at me that I had the wrong opinion or I was having fun wrong. Anyway, with that in mind and with them in mind, none of the arguments on screen are any of the ones I'll be making. And one last note from me in post here. I also wanted to clarify, if you feel I'm making any jabs at you or something like that, it's not intentional. One of the folk I had look at this told me it seemed like I was being adversarial to the viewer. That's not really my intention, and I don't see the points for it in my review as it wasn't wholly elaborated on, just someone said that they felt I was being adversarial sometimes. I don't want you guys to feel bad or anything. I like the game, and I think it's loads of fun most of the time in spite of its flaws. Some interactions with some really toxic fans, off and on, who denied the game has flaws, or comparisons to other titles, harassing me for extended periods about it, are the people I address. If I do seem that way, I guess. It's still not intentional. Yeah, that's not ever going to be directed towards the typical viewer or typical player if I ever do make comments like that. Remember that, for the most part, this is a fundamentally opinionated medium, and if you don't agree with someone, that's fine. You can be critical of aspects of a thing as well, and still be respectful towards others. Back to the review. Right off the bat, the presentation is just as amazing as the first entry. I just have one question. Why won't Zelda let me blow up these rocks? A better question, actually. Why did she bring Link down into the catacombs of Hyrule Castle, an area steeped in a physical manifestation of Ganon's malice? It feels like it doesn't make much sense. Sure, it's cool, but it's a pretty big plot point there. It'll probably get explained later, but if Ganon is sealed down there, why not just seal him again and fight off his malice once more later on? He's such a huge threat that they sealed him away to begin with for 10,000 years. Why didn't Link just stab him before he starts doing all this? He's clearly evil. So I did show this review to some other people before I put it out there so I could make some edits in post and see if there's any errors or things I missed. Someone pointed out to me that Link went down with Zelda because he's Zelda's guardian knight, the last of the champions, but that's not really the question I intended to ask. The question I intended to ask is, why are they going down there at all? By themselves. It doesn't make any reasonable sense. And it's later on explained as Zelda just being too excited and rushing into the ruins. That's still not entirely reasonable. Also, why didn't Link just stab Ganon? Oh, because he's slow and thoughtful, but that's not really the impression you get. Link is almost entirely a blank slate for you to imprint on in this game. And he is in most games. That's fine. He's supposed to be a link to the player and the world and things like that. A link for people to connect with. It's just an odd characterization, and it doesn't let you have that choice. It makes you stop everything for a specific thing to happen. There's so much leeway here now that I know things that are explained later. Why not explain it now or have some info given to us? I get not blowing up the ruins, but I feel a little annoyed with how the game doesn't really tell us anything. It's like in the first game, how they don't explain the clear 5 to 10 year gap between these titles, or they don't really fill in the gap of 100 years very well, or even fill in our recent past between games. But it didn't need to be like this. It would have been better if we had some more information, and even then the information we do get is out of the established character for most of the people involved. It's weird, and I don't like it very much. I do appreciate how this is very clearly the Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time. Nothing held back. It's clear to me right away that this is who it is. Aside from that, I think some people are going to complain about my criticism of this, but it's entirely in character for Nintendo to just overlook this kind of thing. And on top of Breath of the Wild, it made you buy a second piece of merchandise to get the whole plot, the art book, which explained a bunch of tiny lore details that made things make a lot more sense. Yeah, if that happens for this game, I'm not buying it, just put it in the game. I love the story of this series, and setting aside separate merch with the story of the game is kinda scummy, especially from a company as wealthy as Nintendo. Besides, they did just fine in every other entry, and I'm not saying they can't extend the lore, it's just that the lore that applies directly to the game should be in the game. And I feel like this is a valid complaint because the price for Tears of the Kingdom is already excessive. It'd be better if such things were optional, and if someone tells me I need to do it to get the whole plot, then I will absolutely not be doing that. I already avoided buying the game new, getting it pre-owned at a cheaper price for this reason. Now that we're out of the catacombs, I gotta say though, the game's just as beautiful as before, all those years ago. In fact, graphically, there's been clear upgrades, but the art style just doesn't lean into that being readily visible. Instead, lending to a more simple style in this, there's huge advancements made, because you're going to have a hard time telling there's any improvements, really. More on it later, but it's kind of an eyesore sometimes, and this actually causes a number of issues in areas with lots of commotion, like big fights, especially in handheld mode. Otherwise, I guess some textures aren't as muddy now in appearance, but you really have to look close in order to be able to tell. Right after you get out of that section in the catacombs, where Link is all powered up and then gets depowered, you get dropped straight into what I initially perceived as the ruins of Skyloft, stripped clean of everything almost, and missing an arm. I nearly cried. It's so good to see all this again. There were a few references to it in Breath of the Wild, but seeing the Sky Islands as a whole thing that's explorable in another Zelda game is huge for me. I cannot explain how much it means to me to see this series remembered like this. It's just amazing. Yes, it's sad to see it in this state, but I have such joy from seeing this that I'm willing to just kind of overlook the fact that it's completely dilapidated and not actually Skyloft. We find that out later, but hey, it's close enough for me. The Sky Islands alone make me give this game, like on a personal, emotional level, looking at it without any criticism, an 8 or 9 out of 10. Also, Femboy Goat Furry is a thing I can say is canon to Zelda now. I hope everyone enjoys that sentence. So you get the Ultra Hand back from him, and I think that's pretty cool, but he does give you a bunch of other stuff. The fusion and Ultra Hand mechanics aren't really the most entertaining thing in the tutorial here for me. That would be a sin. It lets you swim up through surfaces with a limited range of how far you can jump up to swim up them. Sure, the fusion mechanic is great, and I eventually go on to really enjoy it. There's a point here where I fuse a good bow to a stick. Yeah, just a stick. Eventually, I tossed this off a cliff to make room for the most ridiculous club I could make, made of a regular stick and a whole tree, only to find out it's complete garbage. This was hilarious, and me and my wife were both laughing so hard at this. Then I got mad with this because this stick club wasn't worth it, and I threw it off the edge. The tutorial area is pretty much the exact same as Breath of the Wild, with some added pizzazz for being so high in the sky. You go through all the same motions, but lose some of the points here. See, it's not because of the new traditions being established, it's because the tutorial is much more interruptive to gameplay. I was told twice how to use bows, my powers, my swords, directed on exactly where to go more than once. It's a step back from the previous game's tutorial design, where it let you go and you figured out most of it on your own, with being told maybe once how to use your powers at all. I also heard some other feedback that this happens multiple times later on too, which is really annoying. Sure, it's minor, but it's one of those things where them backpedaling this hard on this is way more noticeable because of how fun the open world mechanics otherwise are. I also noticed this is a huge reference to Ocarina of Time, just like how Breath of the Wild was as well. Yeah, that's pretty cool. They upped the scale a lot this time. Just due to how high in the air you are and how far you go, it really adds to the experience, but I felt more annoyed because it took so long to get from place to place this time. I guess it's cool, but this is the only Sky Island like this, and every following one feels like there's either nothing on it, or it's so much smaller because of it. I do love the Sky Islands, but they're pretty much barren. I wish there was more to do on them. Also, future me here talking about tutorials again. I hate this new hand-holding nonsense. It's an insanely huge backpedal from the previous games. Excellent design philosophy for this kind of thing. Just absolute nonsense. I hate it. It is probably my most hated thing in this game, next to maybe the story. I didn't hate Fi or however you say your name, or Navi this much. Some people say that this isn't an issue and it pushed me to quit, but this is kind of an issue. It's a big detriment to the gameplay when you're told like 80 hours into the game how to handle using a bow after being told 3 previous times. The controls are still a bit unintuitive, and going into the Joy-Con menu for the Switch to remap buttons is a terrible idea because that remaps it for every game. It'd be way better if you could remap or select specific control inputs on the main menu or on the settings menu. We had the excuse when the original Breath of the Wild came out to have issues like this, but 6 years later, it's not much of an excuse. It exists, and you eventually get used to the controls, for me a second time over, but it's not really a good thing to say. We're out of the control jank era, right? I know some games still have it, but it feels weird that Zelda has it, especially from Nintendo. It feels like there should have been more quality assurance here. If all future titles control mostly like this, then that's fine. We'll get used to it and it'll become the new norm. They did that before when the series transitioned to 3D, so I rate this as a non-issue long-term as long as they continue with the control scheme. At least the vistas are all beautiful, but they are a bit of an eyesore because pretty much everything in an area is a solid color. It looked better when it was less graphically advanced, honestly. It's somewhat similar to how Elden Ring has the yellow filter over everything until later in the game, or a red filter in that one area. No, it's not that bad, but it's a very similar feeling to the eyes. Plus, it's also too bright, which is an easy fix in handheld mode, but I don't want to have to make an alternate setting for my TV just to play this game without eye strain right away. Yeah, eventually you do get used to this as well, but a brightness slider is much needed in this title. I know there's going to be someone out there complaining that I'm saying the grass is too green or yellow or the snow is too white. Look, I know it'll be there. After my first play session, I don't think of it as too much different from Breath of the Wild. They gave Link new tools and a new look, a whole new arm, killed the Master Sword within 5 minutes of the game starting, and made a new overworld that's got a lot of absolutely nothing in it. And that's about it. I've been told all of the Sky Islands are kind of like that, but I'll see for myself before judging. I'll probably get into it more next time. If all the Sky Islands are like that, don't expect too much commentary from me on it. Finally, we're down in Hyrule. I didn't write anything more for another play session or two, nothing particularly wowed me. I mean, it looks cool, the game is really pretty, and I had a lot of moments where I was super happy to see more, but the biggest thing for me was finally having everything I needed to free roam. The vistas and sights are still beautiful to look at, but everything just feels empty. I know I'm not playing the most conventional way here, but if you look at my Tears of the Kingdom footage that I have uploaded unedited and unlisted, which I do link below, there's no commentary mind, but it is there. If the game is really as adaptive to the playstyle the person playing it is, then I should be enjoying myself wandering the massive open valleys, ravines, etc., but I'm just not. There's so much nothing. And it's not like there's no interactions, it's not like you can't fly or run anywhere, especially with Zonai devices. It's just massively empty, just like the first game. I mean, I guess if you like that, sure, that's fine, but it feels like there should be a bit more here. The game is much prettier now that I lowered the brightness of my TV to not be an eyesore right away. Sure, I can find things to do here, but I partially feel sometimes they should come to you. Everything roams in distinct areas with few random elements thus far. The most amazing thing to me was soaring through the sky and exploring the Sky Islands, of which there are very few. I managed to climb up through some towers and unlock bits of the map. I've done about a dozen shrines at this point, and I figured out Ascend is super fun. Sure, the fuse mechanic is great, but I want to break everything with Ascend. The puzzle elements in the shrines are all top-notch from what I've experienced so far, and every shrine does feel challenging, but beatable, and every time there's a new element introduced, I play with it until I can't anymore, as I usually run out of time and have to do other things. The puzzles outside in the open world are much the same. Typically, I come back and finish the puzzle as fast as I can, then get back to exploration. The more I explore, the more I enjoy. It improves the more fast travel points are unlocked. Also, someone spoiled me, but you do get a house in the game. I entirely forgot you get one in the last game too. Maybe if the house really meant something to the player, I'd remember it. Maybe if I had to buy it, when you actually do have to buy it in the first game. I don't know why I forgot the house exists. I guess it really just doesn't feel like it has much of a point. It's storage space for sure, and I did go back to Breath of the Wild and it did have weapons stored in there. None of them were good, all middle game stuff, but you know, I guess I used it, then entirely forgot about it. I guess it's good it's optional because I don't need it or use it past getting all the upgrades for it, then I move on. Or do you get upgrades for it? I don't even remember. I shouldn't have to force myself to use it, and I don't have to, which is a good thing. Tell me, what did you use the house for? What purpose did it serve for you? For me, it was a paperweight. I don't think I've gotten to the depths yet, since I don't see all the cool stuff people are talking about or get creeped out by any of it. I get very excited and think it's pretty neat when I get to explore ruins and caves and the like. It's a distinct and vast improvement from the last entry, which just had even less things in it. And I absolutely wanted this as a feature. You know, I think a lot of people did. I want to see more of the underground and sky islands in the future because the mainland of Hyrule is almost entirely unchanged. Though it has the most changes, I guess, if that makes sense. Like, I know the new content is a huge change, but there's almost nothing within the realms of the new content. So you have ruins raining from the sky, new lore everywhere, but some areas you're not allowed to explore because there's an omniscient guard blocking your way. That's more frustrating than anything else because this massively open world game with few restrictions suddenly places an arbitrary restriction blocked by an ever-present guard that sees everything. Yeah, it's another minor one, but that is a flaw. It's there. The overworld of Hyrule remains as it was about 10 years ago in the game's lore. All new additions rain in from the sky, which makes the Sky Islands feel just that much more empty from all the ruins that land down on the earth below. Also, you can use rewind on the smaller ruins that fell to get a huge amount of air, but many of them don't actually connect to any Sky Island. Sure, there's plenty that just float about on their own, but they're implied to be part of a larger landmass, so some of these were just floating around up there for ages after the rest of the island fell, which further implies the islands are falling more and more as we progress. I'm not currently far enough along in the game to be able to tell if this is going to go anywhere, but I am fascinated. Also, a note for me in post, it does not go anywhere. It's just kind of a thing that exists for it to exist. Now, this one's a bit tangential and a bit out of the game. I voiced this criticism of the asset reuse and the emptiness that you still feel in the game, and people got really nasty about it. People made up arguments that I never said or tried to explain things to me that I already said and even agreed with as if I didn't at all. Look, I know very well I can't control them or the people on the internet in general, but this was my first interaction with fans of the game, of which I am also. I'm not kidding though, it's kind of surreal how such a peaceful and fun game, well, peaceful at times, sometimes frustrating, can produce people who don't try to listen, read, or be respectful so long as the other dude doesn't agree with you on a fundamentally opinionated medium. It's insane how devout some fans are, and it makes me uncomfortable. Please think with your heads and be kind to others. There were actually a few memes almost immediately about how I had to hate the game and how I had to hate fun. I don't know how people would get this impression at all unless they were intentionally doing this wrong, taking what I say wrong on purpose, because I clarify a lot that I really do like this game. Or maybe they're just not paying attention and suddenly jumping in and acting like they know everything about the subject. It's kind of ridiculous. Look, I like this game in spite of its flaws, because this game has thus far been enjoyable. But I don't think those people even care about the issues, and they are issues, especially from a company as big as Nintendo. There's so much lore to the series, why'd they invent a new species? Why'd they make them prehistoric? I think I pointed it out days ago when I started writing, but why not use another existing species we haven't seen in a long time? Some might say that's asset reuse too, but they tend to ignore what I'm talking about, would be creating new assets using the series lore and the basis from a previous title, not reusing assets from a previous game. They can't actually do that from, say, the Game Boy Advance or Super Nintendo titles. Remember, I'm not arguing against asset reuse, it's just that they have to do new things with the assets in a good enough amount. Or an amount that doesn't feel tedious, like some aspects eventually go on to be in this game. See, I know that's not an outlandish request either, there's loads of that in Breath of the Wild. As a love letter to the fans of the series, can anyone here tell me that they even remembered Lynels? That was so cool seeing them again for the first time in like 30 years. You get so many overworld references in names of places and even geography to previous entries. The Zonai aren't phoned in, absolutely not, but they're here in place of the long-standing existing lore of the races and species of Hyrule. This is further an issue when the lore for them is almost non-existent. It's one of those things that makes it feel like it's there to be there. They didn't even have the Sky Islands have characters or NPCs. They arbitrarily set it up. Everything except for the Zonai in this instance are pretty cool to me. They introduced another sentient species to the already dense series that already had a number of prehistoric races to use that haven't been seen ever again. The Zonai are cool, yeah, but entirely and fundamentally unnecessary. If the issue is the previous species or race didn't have this culture the Zonai seem to have, then I must introduce people to multiple cultures of the same species or race becoming entirely different based on region. The Gorons have done this to some extent in almost every entry, down to the Wind Waker timeline too. Actually, I think the Gorons do this especially in the Wind Waker timeline, the one where Don't Link fails in Ocarina of Time and the Rito eventually become the Postman again in this timeline for no reason now that I think about it. I guess I do appreciate it, but it lessens their existing culture in this timeline. Yeah, it's minor, but it's important in the long run because they introduced an entire new species and lore that they now have to keep track of, and the demand for more of them will be there just as much as the demand for the older species in the series already existed. By far and large, no matter if I like them or not, I feel introducing the Zonai is a misstep, one they have to inevitably expand on for better or worse, when it could have used an existing species in an entirely new view as a separate culture from what already existed. They did this with several overworld locations in this game and even previous game series characters and entities. In fact, the previous game did the exact thing the Zonai do in this game, but they used the Sheikah. Their otherwise biggest contribution is wholly unnecessary, existing solely to push the plot along. Now, this commentary I was going to exclude because it is completely undated, but then I also later comment on it. And it's just redundant as a whole, you know. But, I asked a question to myself in this review. Why do the Zonai women look like humans? Why do the men look like anthropomorphic goats? But it turns out that's not how that works, and I will comment more on that later. Now, before I started this next session, I talked to a fan who's been playing more or as much as me in a group for people who play games and are adults. And it may or may not involve colors. This guy has a better idea in mind of how to go about this. I was informed I missed a few talking points with Robbie earlier on after getting the glider, which would get me the catalog or the Collectopedia. After I came down from the sky, Robbie took too long to spawn in due to my speed, so I missed that. Nice. That actually happens quite a few other times. That did happen to a Korok in a previous session where they suddenly appeared in like maybe 15 seconds after I'd hit the ground. I guess that's what I get for being too fast now, and I think that has been patched, but it's still slow sometimes. This person also informed me of where to find Impa, but that comes later. So I wanted to get the catalog and follow Robbie into the depths and finally start exploring that. So for this session, I did just that and entered the true depths, not those tiny caves I've been exploring. I gotta say, it's pretty cool. The deep caverns of the world contain gloom enemies, and when they strike you, they will decrease your heart amount by 1. sometimes 2. Maybe more than that. There's probably stronger ones. Be a pro gamer and don't get hit, or be me and get mashed into the dirt several times. I like the flora and fauna down here in the massive caves, the drawings on the walls, the amounts of ore laying around I can use for upgrading, and probably should at some point. The depths have to be my favorite addition in Breath of the Wild's 2.0 update. Yeah, they feel absolutely massive, but they're not that huge. This isn't as much a complaint as it is an observation. See, Fallout New Vegas is a good comparison because the map is actually tiny, but it's densely packed. I get a similar feeling here, and spoiler alert, later on that is confirmed. The only real complaint I have is it took me until completing Robbie's quest here to unlock the catalog and finally start filling it up. I have the terrible need to fill out every bestiary I see as best I can, and I was deprived of it for far too long. I did notice that enemies in the depths are more aggressive than those up top on the surface, which is fair, I guess. Lots of people hyped them up to me, and I feel a little bit disappointed from that hype. They're good, but they're not spooky or scary or even particularly huge. There's very little to interact with down here aside from pose, and not the kind you argue with online. The pose in Breath of the Wild 2 Update 2.15 are used as currency for a thing I haven't tried to use yet, but probably should. Maybe in my next session I will go that way. After things start to get dicey for my 4 hearts down there and gets down to 1 heart, I fast traveled out and made my way to Impa. After probably dying 3 times out of hubris trying to get to a shrine on a mountain, turns out I don't have enough stamina for that yet or enough hearts. Impa's actually one of my favorite characters from the first game and Age of Calamity, but I can't say much about her. A lot of Breath of the Wild isn't super memorable to me for the Sheikah story, other than they exist. I mean, sure, they do a lot of the historical stuff, but how much do they actually do for you distinctly in Breath of the Wild? You have some side quests, but I think that's it. We also didn't get much of Impa in Breath of the Wild. We got a lot of her in Age of Calamity, and she's got some massive combos. Every scene she's in does have a strong personality, and I do appreciate that. Impa isn't the true waifu of this game, though. I know, that's a shame. That belongs to the new Sheikah chief, and her partner there is a husbando. Hello, my 2 favorite meatsickles. Anyways, let's move on to Impa. Just forget I said that. Impa triggers flashback sequences of either Zelda or the original Kingdom of Hyrule via starting her questline and collecting the Dragon Tears. Which, once more, whenever the Zonai are on screen, it feels incredibly forced. I dig how they look in their vibe, but I just will never understand or appreciate how they put in a new race here where they didn't need to. Maybe if it were a race of enemies instead of a race of ancestral species to Hyruleans, Hyrulites, Hyrulans, whatever anyways. I know they're not like distinctly ancestral, but they founded the kingdom of Hyrule, which is what I mean by ancestral, so take that as you will. The flashback sequences gain you Tears of the Dragon or whatever it is, I didn't pay attention to the name. They're important for free roam, I am told, but I currently don't see their importance. I'll collect them nonetheless. The first flashback reveals to be Zonai women look like human women with some fuzzy and furry bits. I hate this design choice. And I'm just gonna leave off the rest of the tangent there because that changes later on. Feel free to tell me how stupid Past Me was. I think Past Me was pretty stupid too. Aside from feeling like the flashbacks have very little purpose other than explaining to you the plot and predicting the future for you. Well, technically the past, but you're not supposed to know. Oh, whatever. I had loads of fun. Even the other flashback I get at the end and uncovering the goddess ruins somewhere in the middle of that area. Oh, right, the goddess ruins from Skyward Sword are here. Yes, I am foaming at the mouth. Thank you for asking. This was here in the first game as well, and another large shrine too, I believe. And that one might be the actual goddess shrine from Skyward Sword. It's not relevant to me personally. I am above normal levels of excitement seeing this kind of thing at all times. I really love this. When it comes to Zelda, I'm not really a traditionalist or anything like that. I enjoy the traditional formula more, but I understand things and times change. It's good to know that they haven't forgotten the inspiratory sources. I still don't like the Zonai here. It feels like they're kind of shoved in, especially because they have nothing to do with the goddess shrine. Why not just have it be the Sheikah? It could have actually been demons, though. They reference the demons a ton, or at least the Demon King. I feel like there's going to be something about that. I hope there is. There's probably actually not, though. Maybe this is the game that ends the cycle. Who knows? Not me, not quite yet. There's just so much lore and so many races and species and so many enemy types. They really didn't need to make a new race. Instead, they could have had one of the existing races or one of the existing sentient monster races, because we know that a good few of them are sentient. We could have had it be that the monsters are losing their sanity thanks to the curse of the Demon King or something over time, because I don't know, that seems more reasonable to me. If they're going to invent new things, they could make it a bit more engaging. Every time I see the Zonai on screen, I wince a little because I know this is a race they're going to forget about at some point in the future, because it's way too vague about what they do or how they'll do it, because they're already extinct. Then we'll celebrate their return once more and forget the Minish, the Kikwi, and the Rito, because the Rito do tend to get forgotten. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, but they already backpedaled and turned the Rito into Postman again, so I don't know. You know, I'm just saying, no one liked Uka's species, the weird teleport thing from Twilight Princess, and this would have been a perfect time to put her back in, because she's from the Sky Islands. We could have thrown them off the little islands. Oh, the possibilities. Please just let me throw Uka off a cliff. This session ended on a much higher note thanks to the help of others and because of a really funny moment that I can't find in my footage anymore. Well, I mean, it's on the unlisted playlist. That stuff's just unedited, so you're gonna be barraged with, like, weird audio and junk. The puzzles are looking up, being much more well crafted than they were in Breath of the Wild 1. They're capitalizing on the vertical as well as horizontal movement. It's a vast improvement, and it's good to see it in another open world game. There's like a bunch of open world games with huge vertical movement now, but none quite feel like this. And it's been out of the Elder Scrolls series since Morrowind, and it's something I miss in every single entry. I feel if they don't make more games like this, every following game might feel a little disappointing. Not counting those tutorials, of course, I feel the exploration takes on Elder Scrolls level of grandeur, but with that Nintendo vibe and quality they're known for. It's an amazing experience to be able to do this kind of thing in an open world game that isn't just Cause or Elder Scrolls. I mean, look, I made a hover bike and it crashed. Okay, well, I tried. Anyways, my next session is looking up. For the next few sessions, I spend time free roaming and gathering materials, completing small quests throughout Hyrule, and getting as many shrines as I can. I maxed out my stamina in a session last night. I also did encounter Master Koga, and I didn't expect him to be, alive. Nintendo doesn't like to kill off characters, so I should have expected it, but I just didn't. I wish I had some choice in this game as to whether or not I could make him an ally with us by explaining the situation like in Age of Calamity. My perspective of this character changed a lot when Koei Tecmo got a hold of him, and I really hoped for more out of the first encounter. As I have learned from playing, it will get better, but I don't think I'll ever make Koga flip sides, even temporarily. It sucks because there's a lot of promise with this character, and he's only incompetent for the story to progress and happen. As we see 100 years ago, he's actually quite competent. Also, I don't know how he's still alive. He's well over 100 years old. I know the Sheikah are very long-lived, but even Robbie got old, and I know the Yiga aren't really the Sheikah anymore, but they are related to the Sheikah. They're like cousins or something genetically now, like a genetic cousin, something like that. I'm not going to be petty enough to try and discuss the genealogy of a video game character like this. Instead, I'll save that for later on. The Poes have become much more interesting to me, and I am now seeking out to gain the Dark Link sit. I also, with advice from friends in that previous server, have managed to finally gain a foothold looking for ore underground, and refining it into further forms, such as energy, or other kinds of energy. That is played up for humor, and it doesn't sound cool, but it is pretty cool and it's fun to do. What I'm doing lets me build more constructs and make more items. Plus, I need more of the ore from the Zonites. Zonite ore? Zionite ore? Oh my god, it's not Zionite. I put in Zionite. Why did I put in Zionite? To make things with auto build, which I just got from defeating Koga the first time. It's supposed to be a late game ability apparently, and it's pretty powerful, at least I'm told. But I find myself handcrafting items most of the time still. It's just more fun that way to piece together your Lego sets, you know? I got a few more dragon tears. I struggled to retake Lurlin village from a bunch of pirates before giving up and deciding to come back later, and explored the depths in depth. Yes, it is worth it. I still don't think the depths are huge. There's just a lot of densely packed content that adds a lot to the game in a small amount. The terrain itself is hard to get through, resulting in me trying harder and harder to get through it, taking more time and more ores and resources, but I still get places underground way faster than on the surface, which tells me that really is smaller. The Zonai are still cool, but the more I learn about them, the more I learn having two of them in this game even being already dead. Feels like it defeats the purpose of the lore. Like, why introduce a mostly extinct species where two of them are left and one is conveniently the king of Hyrule? That's genuinely not explained at all. They're just here to be here in almost every flashback, nothing more. This could have been the Sheikah, with Link getting the hand of a Redead and unearthing yet more Sheikah shrines, or something like that. I think that would have been more rewarding, and I would have questioned the introduction of two ghost goats way less, because they wouldn't be there. They could have still been in the game intro too, the Sheikah. They're seen being absurdly advanced in every way in the prior game, and that's forgotten for the most part in this one, or isolated to just 2 or 3 characters. Some people talk about it maybe once or twice. Even in Skyward Sword we see the Sheikah are quite advanced as guardians of what will go on to become the Hyrule royal family. I just don't quite get why they're like this though. It feels like the Sheikah are here to be here now, and their plot point could have been switched with the Zonai, or the Zonai could have been switched with them, and it would have really been just as reasonable. Now, in my next few sessions, I had even more fun, unlocking things and progressing at fast rates. At some point in the last play session, I maxed out my stamina and am now investing into my heart containers. Out of need, not out of want. At least I got to do what I wanted for the most part, but man, am I underpowered. I'm dying in one hit to everything under the sun, and even got into a tussle with an obsidian Frox where it squashed me like a little Link pancake. Talk about messy, but no guts came out. Don't worry, E for everyone. Well, E10 and up. Sure, I didn't spec out as expected, but when I get there, all those enemies will regret it. Really, I'm having such a better time, and that has changed my whole mood on the title, just going from talking with toxic fans who don't think I'm doing anything right to fans who actually want to see me have fun. That's a thing, who would have thought? It went from I have to play this to see what's so great to just having a great time, and as such, my entries have become a little bit sparse. The puzzles get better and better, the open world becomes more fun to navigate, weapons are more enjoyable to use. I figured out magic rods at some point, and I never have been so happy to blast away my enemies. Something dawned on me in post, and I think I'm writing less at this point about this game, not because there's any more to write about and I'm just having too much fun. I think there's actually less to write about, like in general, because I'm not really getting much out of exploring the world. As such, at this point, I'm actually starting to suffer from a bit of burnout, and for at least a little while, I'm going to eventually not play the game coming up for about 2 weeks, just because, well, it's not as fun. Alright, I should talk about the pose though. I bought a bunch of armor from the goddess statues in the depth to put off the gloom down there. It's not just great for defending against an enemy hit. There are some armors that actually just prevent the progression of gloom, and it's pretty good for early on. I like the merchants down in the depths. I just wished their text moved faster, and their zones where you can start interacting with them was more tight. I end up accidentally speaking with them repeatedly before leaving because the text goes by so slow, and their radiuses for speech are often too far or not far enough away. It's a tiny inconvenience that's amplified by how good the exploration and talking to these new goddess statue merchants is. There is actually a point where I eventually just stop visiting these guys, or climbing up them at all, because it's much more of an inconvenience to actually gather up a bunch of Poes and buy from them than it is to wait 7 days for things to respawn, because you can just sleep 24 hours at a time. I guess on to durability, because that's a hot topic. I keep seeing people talking about how durability is fixed, but it's really not. Everything breaks much the same and maybe faster, but you can stick them together now. Even your constructs can break, be squashed, or be destroyed. If anything, durability is more concerning because stacked weapons can break. This leaves you with half or less damage. It sucks a bit when you get past how cool it is you can fuse things together. I guess this is solved by how you eventually become an armory, but you don't really become an armory. You still suffer from the exact same detriments. You'll just have a million weapons, and then when they all start to break over time, what you're gonna have is the problem of resupplying those weapons and fusing weapons and with items to make sure that you have a good enough damage output. At least for dealing with the open world, pretty much every boss is a complete pushover. This next session, the only thing of huge note is I finished off the sword geoglyph. I was told that the cutscene here would make me feel something, but all I really felt was eh. Most of the things people are hyping me up for, I don't see any of the jazz behind. And some of that might be because I'm being told. Like, I don't know why people are telling me as example, but like, I don't mind being told most of the time. This is one of very few instances that maybe telling me is making things lose impact. Usually I look forward to things more, but because I know, I can look at it more critically when it finally gets here. But if it falls apart under the eyes of scrutiny, it's probably not that good to begin with. I did, in the next session, finally reclaim the one seaside village, Lurlin, and began the reconstruction of it. At first, I thought that doing the side quest made me realize how bare bones the construction of Tarrytown was in Breath of the Wild, but I eventually went on to, learn otherwise. I also explored the depths a lot more and got a classic Link wig with hat. Yeah, it's cool the DLC items are spread about the world and all that, but this is a bit of a mess to try and gather up. Maybe if they were positioned better, or the ones way out of the way were more rewarding. I got the Twilight Princess tunic, but it was a horrible grind to get to. And when I finally got it, it was entirely not worth it, even if I liked Twilight Princess, because it starts off and doesn't really give you anything special. It also doesn't give you anything special when fully upgraded, which, I guess more on that later. Since I've last wrote about this, 2 more sessions have passed. I managed to try and find my way into the Rito section of the mines by luck and generous topography hints. In this closed-off section of the mine, I got a really cool schema stone, and finally got the vertical launch I've been trying to get in other circumstances. I'll probably use this item a lot, which, spoiler alert now that I'm recording this in post, I did not. I barely used this at all. Also, the Yiga really need to up their game. How do they have a camp inside the Rito portion of the depths when they can't even get in it and they can't figure out how to get in at all? This makes 0 sense. I suppose it makes sense later on, but why is it already here? I feel like it's just because Nintendo was a bit lazy and didn't want to add in a little Boolean trigger to flick on or off the model. Yes, it really is actually that simple. It's just an on and off switch. I don't know why they didn't. I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to notice there's a ton of small flaws like this. So I did talk a bit about how the female Zonai look like regular humans, but that's not true. See, the original king and queen of Hyrule are 2 different species, or 2 different races, kind of, I guess. I mean, technically probably 2 different races because they can interbreed between them and whatever. That really isn't important. It turns out Zonai women do also look like goat people. Yes, that is my bad. I was really dumb and I didn't think that it was a thing. I thought Nintendo went with the typical trope because this has been a very tropey experience. Minoru is a bit lost on me here. I don't really like her as a character, and I don't even grow to like her as a character. She feels superfluous. Apparently, the original Queen of Hyrule can feel a bloodline connection with Zelda. How? There's 10,000 years apart. How much inbreeding is going on in this family? It could be that she feels a generalized royal or Hylian ancestry or blood relation. Maybe I did misunderstand that, but either way, this means borderline nothing and adds nothing to the plot at all when you really break it down. Like, Zelda's family line could have been introduced anywhere along the way. You didn't have to make her related to Sonia, because it doesn't make sense or matter if she's related to Sonia. Sonia wouldn't even be able to tell. Maybe they share a similar magic or something, but a lot of people in the series actually have a similar magic. I don't get this at all. There's no point. I'm still kind of reeling about how I thought Sonia was a Zonai, but no, she's a Hylian and she's a queen. Nonetheless, she's as related to Zelda as I am to my 70-year-old neighbor whom I've never seen, and I moved here from about 1,000 miles away. I also don't share any of the racial backgrounds of this neighbor, but I would be more related to them. I know this is pedantic, but it's just so bad. Like I said, the only implication here that can exist is the Hyrule royal family is filled with absurd amounts of incest, and I could believe that because of the European influence on the franchise. After a few more sessions, I thought I'd just say and start typing again. I've been doing my best to map out the world, going as far as the eye can see, and in the process of this, I found all the geoglyphs. But I wasn't surprised where the story went at all. Sure, it's a bit sad and melancholy, but that's expected. So you find out the sacred dragon tears are from Zelda, who ate one of these sacred items, one of the Magatamas, and as such became a dragon, losing all sense of self and personhood in exchange for restoring the Master Sword. She has control of some divine powers and becomes more divine by doing this or whatever. Look, it's a good scene, and oh my god, the scene for getting the Master Sword from after this is just beautiful. You have to struggle against her as she flails around as the blade of evil's bane has become more entangled in her newly formed dragon hair. This consumes your stamina and not your health this time around. It is handled beautifully. Honestly and truly, it is beautiful. I know I said I wasn't surprised, and it's true. I'm really not surprised by this at all. I'm also kind of taken aback they did this to her. They do things like this to her all the time, but making her lose herself entirely as a dragon to restore the Master Sword is a scene only ruined by how fucking goofy I look in it. This version of Zelda is the GOAT. Whatever that means, I don't actually know what that means. I never learned. Look, she took the true ultimate sacrifice, and as I know right now, there's no point of return. Currently, right now, really and absolutely truly, this is the saddest I felt in the game. Along the storyline for this, in several flashbacks and cutscenes, you do get informed that if you eat one of those, you'll live forever. Take note of that. And there's no turning back. Take note of that. There's like zero way to turn back. And you aren't told a way to turn back at all throughout the whole time of the game. Remember this. It is a transformation that can't be reversed at all. Anyway, after this, I went back to the depths and harvested a bunch of Zonite while I continued to map out the world. At this point, I ran into a wall of spontaneous combustion just under the Elden area. With sadness in my heart and mind, I decided it was finally time to take on Yunobo's questline for the main story. I know. I had to stop exploring to experience the game. Actually, technically, I had to stop experiencing the games to experience the story because I really didn't like this. Since I already did so much, there were only two things that really surprised me during this. And one of them was the marble rock roast clearly poisoning people, but Yunobo being absolutely convinced this is fine because Zelda told him so. Twice he resists the pull of the evil mask he's wearing or whatever, before being forced into it by said mask, and so by all means, sure, I guess that's how that works. Apparently, much like Pin's questline sometimes, Zelda is running around giving people bad advice. Yeah, I don't think I mentioned it because it felt like nothing at the time and still feels like nothing. But we did see Zelda after she went back in time at the start of the game. This is implied to not really be her or a version of her that's been time displaced, because she's a dragon now, as we just saw, but I'm going to tell you right now, it's extremely clearly not Zelda. Like, how could you think it's Zelda? Oh no, how could she betray us like this? What happened in those 10,000 years? Even without knowing she turns into a dragon, I was convinced this wasn't Zelda because right away, none of this is in character. And I'm really appalled that people just kind of go in line with it. Like, every single person we see is like, I saw the princess and oh my god, it was great. Why? She scares away animals with her presence. That never happens. You know the only character that happens for in the series? Ganon. Of course, Link doesn't tell Yunobo after he gets free of the mask, and Yunobo is still like, hey, that was clearly Zelda, right? Why don't we go after her? Even though you know she's a dragon at this point, if you've already done it, you could subvert so much of the story if you just could tell people you've made story progress. The only people in town with good heads on their shoulders are two random kids and the oldest man in Hyrule, I believe, whatever the previous elder of the Gorons are. I don't know who they are. After a brief boss fight with Yunobo, he also becomes a companion, comes back to his senses. That mask just snaps right off. Link still does not mention Zelda as a dragon. I just don't get it. Come on, man, am I gonna have to poke you with a stick for all of this? Like, what's wrong with you? Yes, I expected this. It is a Nintendo game, and there's a distinct storyline they want you to follow. It would still be nice if the game acknowledged your progress in the story as you went along instead of only in side quests. That's really lame. I also finally finished putting together Lurlin somewhere in the last few days, and man was I wrong. This is just a huge step back and a big disappointment. Just shove a few trees in some holes and it's done. You can do everything on the spot, and there's no big system of progression. There's no huge rewards for it. I guess you get a free rest stop for a few tries. I'd have loved it if I had to go around and hunt down the villagers, as it would incentivize me to talk to random people. The way it plays locks you from getting specific dialogues from these characters, which would be fine, but I am interested in seeing this and hunting them down to bring them back. You don't even learn where they were staying after Lurlin went and burned down after a mysterious infection of pirates, and still have to find that after. Some of them leave behind diary entries. Some of it doesn't even have quest markers. One of them is in Hateno. It feels like this was supposed to be an aspect of the quest Nintendo cut as well, and also them simplifying the process. This was made so simple, I legitimately wondered if there was going to be another pirate attack at the end. No, there's not. It's just very straightforward and not very fun after you get past the surface level. I thought this was going to be a big quest, but color me disappointed. The way it worked before was way better. You know, back with Terrytown. Anyways, now that the curse of ADHD is done with me for now, I got on back to the main quest and proceeded up Death Mountain, a long and arduous fast travel. Because I had already used the Sky Islands to get all the shrines, I could see the mountain. Yeah, I just went right up and fast traveled. It's alright, it's cool you can do this, but the system of progression drives me insane sometimes. Clearly, they did not care if you could break the story or progression too quickly and too heavily one-sided in one direction, and did not care to have checks or rewards for you doing this. I really expected characters to respond differently based on if you've made progress in specific ways, like most games of this type. I think I can only name 1 or 2 games that don't do this, and no one really thinks they're very good. Or if they do think they're very good, they think they're good for not the story. Come on, man, even Bethesda isn't this lazy. Well, they are sometimes, but give them credit. At least Tears of the Kingdom is truly beautiful. The grandeur of everything you see is just completely astounding. On that note, because it's so pretty, the game is actually really laggy in parts with lots of motion, and sometimes even in areas with near to no motion. I don't get why. Even Nintendo has trouble making games for their own system now, I guess. See, that's weird to me because a lot of Nintendo games don't have this problem even now, and a lot of third-party games don't have this problem. The Nintendo Switch is getting a lot of flack for not being able to run games, but that's the fault of the people making them for the console, not the console itself. You're not gonna boot up an emulator on your phone and when it lags, you go, oh man, this sucks. Clearly, they should have made this game with this in mind. I guess that kind of works for the comparison. But what I'm trying to say is, they're not making the game for the console, they're making a game for a console. They're not fitting Switch, the specifications of the console and how it operates. But that being said, soon after I wrote this, Nintendo did announce they've got another console under development. That's cool. I hope it's a Switch with not one but 2 screens and 3DS support. This is clearly a real suggestion that you should take absolutely seriously. Yes, clearly. I actually would like a Switch with 2 screens and 3DS support, but I don't think that's gonna happen. And then I lied about ADHD being done with me. I defeated the boss on top of the volcano, which was very disappointing. I get that it's supposed to be a build-up for an even bigger, badder boss below, and that's very obvious right away. But once I get down there and had flame-resistant armor on, I still combusted because I only had 1 piece and you need 2. Why even give people false hopes like this? I gave up and went back to town and purchased the whole set of armor, even though you only needed 2. I just wanted it to match, and this was the armor I actually wore the most in Breath of the Wild. From there, I finished mapping the whole of the underground, and it felt amazing, except for one thing that I missed. Apparently, there's still more stuff hidden away. I don't know where. I'll probably find out. Lots of incentives to explore and all that. I really do like the exploration. Then when I finally thought about continuing the story, I went full ADHD again and completed Master Koga's storyline. It ended alright. His interactions are fun, and I am once more left wanting for more out of him. As far as I can tell right now, he's just gone. That's more lame than the durability mechanic of this game. Immediately, this questline is a 3 out of 10. Real talk, this did disappoint me. Like, heavily, it disappointed me. It was so extremely forced. I didn't really talk about Yiga schematics. I can only use one of them sometimes. They're not super worth it. I think the only of the Yiga schematics or even the schema stones that I used regularly at all, I eventually stopped using, and I had one sit up as a regular device to build far before I got the schema stone for it, because it was just a hot air balloon. Come on. Yeah, Koga is really disappointing. Eventually you do go on and can enter the Yiga hideout and hear a little bit more about that. They're like, no, Koga hasn't been defeated yet. That's a lie. It's propaganda. And whatever, I guess. At least they respond to it. Some of them do. Most of them don't. I think like 2 people do. It's so poorly implemented. A better way of doing this would actually be to have Koga not flip sides, but later appear in the Yiga clan hideout, of which he never does. You could also approach Koga in disguise and get different dialogues, which, as far as I'm aware, isn't possible. And maybe, if possible, since we can see in Age of Calamity that Koga isn't really a bad guy, he's just misled, you could twist his arm into not being such a bad dude. He's just kind of an idiot sometimes. I mean, everyone can be. That's normal. Why does it have to be his whole character when Nintendo writes him? Now I went on to finally complete Yunobo's part of the story. And when going to beat the Fire Temple, I got a little bit of ADHD about it, but not too much. I was sworn that the puzzles in these were going to be good, but man, I broke these so fast, I can't really critique them. Were there even any puzzles? I don't think there were any at all. Maybe there were some, tell me in the comments. If not, I'm severely disappointed, and I'm still very severely disappointed that I could just bypass everything with parkour. Parkour isn't a puzzle, it's just running and jumping into specific spots. I guess technically it's a puzzle, but it's more like acrobatics. There was genuinely huge hype for these, and even the really nice fan hyped them up, like all the dungeons actually, which eventually I go on to find aren't that great. Every single person has hyped them up as being great. No, the dungeons are all kind of terrible. They're like Breath of the Wild dungeons, but bigger, so they feel more time consuming. Sure, you get more time to mess around with things because they're bigger, but it's not really worth the exchange. Side quests actually gave me way more trouble. I've actually had to stop and Google for help for some side quests, because I guess sometimes they're asinine, and sometimes you shouldn't be able to figure them out, and sometimes I'm just stupid. A little bit of mix of all three. Once I think one of them clicked for me, I was like, oh my god, that makes perfect sense. Simple as that. It's actually pretty rare for a side quest to just like click for me and make perfect sense in this game. Sometimes, or even a lot of the solutions are kind of asinine. Like, they don't tell you things. It's not something observable sometimes. You have to go out of your way to get it, which I guess is expected in a game like this, but, you know, it just doesn't mesh well with everything else, especially with the amount of handholding they do for you for tutorials, which just before I ended this session, I believe I got a tutorial for how to use, Ultra Hand or something. It's absolutely insane. Back onto the Fire Temple, I guess. At one point, I tried to make a minecart into an elevator to get through the ceiling in an area, but that was because I actually got bored trying to find a fun way to beat this spot. Then I paused the recording to take care of my son for like 20-ish minutes or something like that, and when I got back, I forgot to start the recording again, so it cuts back to a point past that, but it took me like 3 minutes to get there, because I just walked around and climbed for about 7 meters, walked for like 3 meters, like 10 meters total, and I was already going to the next spot without any puzzles at all. Oh, you're not playing the game the way it's intended. Why do they give you all of these tools and then just go, don't use them? Why not take them away? Like, they clearly do that in other segments of the game. If they want you to do it a specific way, they should make sure you do it that way. I don't get why they don't. And finally, the boss of Yunobo's area is Goma. Goma is back and even easier to beat. I wish I was joking. It's not even about level. Any skill at the game will take out Goma fast, because beating Goma is just easy. You destroy the legs it's standing on, or you shoot the eye, and when it crawls onto the ceiling, you can just shoot the eye. And you can actually launch yourself in the air for just constant quick time or bullet time or whatever you want to call it, and just continuously lay into the eye, and you'll have Goma dead really, really fast. This and the dungeon weren't thought out as areas to explore or enemies to fight or anything like that, because you do fight some enemies in the form of constructs in the dungeon, and some of them gave me more challenge than the boss. Yes, the regular enemy that dies in 2 hits. That's just sad, man. Okay, after I beat Goma, it cured all the gloom-roasted Gorons, giving glee to the mines once more. Because, as we all know, mining is such a wonderful job with no negative elements whatsoever. I did some side quests here and there after that. I finally finished off Pin's questline. It's certainly the most fun questline I've had, and I want to see him and Cass team up in the future. I absolutely loved his character. I loved Cass's character. These two would be great together. And he actually even references Cass. That's so cool. I love it. From here, I went back to exploring for a bit before I realized I probably needed to make some story progress. Especially since I wasn't making much progress with exploring, and I need to beat this game at some point before Pikmin 4 comes out, and I start recording that. That's 10 days from now at the time of recording this, actually. Enjoy! Here, I decided to free Riju from her struggles. But really, the big deal of this area was the Gibdo. The Gipto? How do I pronounce it? Actually, I've heard it said a bunch of different ways. Tell me in the comments. I'd be interested in learning. This iteration of them is so cool, like, except for the weird mushroom that spits out the corpses that spawns these guys. Or, the bugs? Whatever. So I'll give them points for this, not as many because of the mushroom. Mushrooms housing dead bodies makes sense in life, but it's weird to see this kind of spawning in a Zelda title. That's a nitpick there. I think their design is an overall cool thing. Also, their appearance in the underground is a pretty huge lore implication as well. That is some top-notch enemy design, and that's some pretty good writing. I like that. Riju herself is pretty cool, I guess. She's made a lot of improvements since we've last seen her. She has some mild contrivances in her plot, though. When you show up, you're just what she needs to succeed, even though anyone else could have done this. At that moment, sure, whatever, I guess it works. This is less of a chosen one plot than the first title sometimes, but it makes when it rears its head a lot worse. Thus far, during the recording of this script, I haven't drank any water. Now I have. I didn't like that. So Riju is just figuring out how to control the powers of the past champions without the lightning helmet because the Yiga stole it from her, or something like that. Whatever. She uses it to smite down her foes. The notorious training dummies. Bad jokes aside, this is the least of the champions' introductions thus far, and I'm considering the previous game as well when I say this. It's so in your face about how it's a tutorial that it pulled me entirely out of the game. As for the chosen one plot, it would be better if not every single side quest absolutely needed you there to solve it, as if Zelda's chosen swordsman is also destined to solve mayoral disputes across the kingdom. What is this, medieval knighthood? Actually, it may be based on that, but it's not how it plays out. Link stumbles upon something and it's entirely up to him to fix it. Why? But, of course it is. He's the only one who can fix it because he's the hero. I don't know what else to say for Riju's story. It's cool, I guess. She certainly made the most progress of the previous champions between games, but it was entirely expected progress. She had the most to grow. The Great Pyramid was awesome. The Queen Gibto fight was great. And here's when I discovered I could refight bosses in the depths, and I absolutely loved that. Those big arenas you encounter, not like the Colosseum arenas, that's where you can refight them. From here, I wandered for a while doing just that, and I think I mentioned earlier that I joined the Yiga. If not, I did join the Yiga here. I became a Blade Master. Yeah, I like that. That's cool. I thought I'd get to meet Koga, but no, just a lot of really bitter Yiga who almost caught me being Link once. They're very typically bad guys in a not funny way, but it does fit their character archetypes. I can't hate it, it could be better. I'm surprised none of them are more suspicious of me wearing Yiga clothes or give me a bigger test, because I stole all of the Yiga clothes from various Yiga bases in the world. I don't know, it feels like they are incompetent grossly. To an extent, far worse than they were either in Age of Calamity or Breath of the Wild. Actually, in Age of Calamity, everyone is surprisingly competent. It's like, for some reason in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, people just became incompetent for the story to progress. I don't really know why. After acquiring the Lightning Home from the Yiga hideout, I wondered for a while. And then I decided it was finally time to take on the Rito. I hate the new champion. Someone said it's because he's like overly positive and cheery. No, he's not overly positive or cheery. I mean, he is positive and cheery after you beat his story, but you barely interact with him ever again. He's egotistical and way too headstrong, and that's such a basic plot. It's so incredibly typical that I don't even remember his name. I was borderline grinding my teeth every single time the Rito story progressed. Sure, the passage of time and all that is great, but why didn't they just continue Teba's storyline? Also, Teba kinda sucks too, because he's just negligent of not only his child, but several of his duties. They downgraded him from a main character to a side character as such, they had to give some level of leeway to Teba's kid to take over. I seriously don't even remember his name. I just read a thing where someone criticized the review. I'm like, not like criticized bad. I don't ever try to do that or try to say that. They gave me criticisms on what I said, and it had the kid's name in it, but I still don't even remember that. Teba's kid is written like an adult who forgot what being a child is like. He just misses all the marks for what children are like, even if there's a 10-year time gap between games, there's no reason this kid would act like this. At minimum, he's 10 years old. I mean, at minimum, he's 5 years old. At maximum, he's 10 years old. There's also no way he would be entrusted with clearing away the blizzard with Link. This is so weirdly written. It's so forced. And once more, I don't really care about this character, or I dislike them, because there's no reason for them to be there. And even his ability for you is way worse than Rivali's ability was in the first game. I don't buy for a second that Teba would be so caught up with his work that he'd just ignore his son. It's so out of character for how he acted in the first game. In those 10 years, he became chief of the Rito, but why does he have to be neglectful for that? He was always dutiful, and he was always on point. That's part of why he was so admirable, and why Rivali was such a good foil for him to improve. Teba is by default a good person, and humble, and Rivali is a showboat. I guess they kind of tried to do that with Teba's kid, but it doesn't work because they don't spend much time together and they don't get many interactions with each other. And Teba becomes a much weaker character because of it, especially if you look at these in a vacuum. That's just unfortunately how that's going to work. That being said, the rest of the Rito storyline is great, just not Teba's kid. Without Teba's kid, I think this whole storyline would be significantly better, and he doesn't need to be here. He is another pointless addition to push the plot along. Actually, come to think of it, all of the characters have flat character arcs. And this is something I have written into the script, and I'm not going off on a tangent. They're static, they don't grow or change aside from upgrades by the player themselves. No character really changes in a way that feels like it means something except for maybe Riju. But I already praised her. I guess that's offset by the 10-year time gap and how everyone's at least somewhat different, well, up to 10-year time gap. But tell me if you left home for 5 to 10 years and came back and everyone was the exact same, they just changed jobs. Maybe sometimes their clothing. Oh, look, one of them aged slightly. Everything, everyone, essentially the same. Even though there's meteors raining from the sky. I think the most joy I got out of all of this was Terrytown being so much bigger, and the two people in charge there actually remember you, not as Zelda's chosen swordsman that goes everywhere with her, but as the guy who got them married and the guy that helped build Terrytown. It makes sense. It's just weird, especially because Link and Zelda went everywhere together for years upon years between games, that no one else really seems to remember you're you. You're like a backdrop to Zelda, I guess. After beating Riju's questline, I moved on and got this idea in my head that I should collect all the bubble gems. Now, the bubble gems go to the monster merchant guy from the first game's brother to turn him into a Satori. Well, we'll see how that works out. At this point in the game, I've actually gotten all the rewards from this guy that are possible in the game, except for one, which is for getting them all. So now I have to explore every single cave, because in every cave, there's one bubble frog. Every single cave. Wells do not count. Trust me, I looked forever. Now, this isn't actually fun at all. This is just really tedious, especially because you have to go to every single cave, and the reward you get for the quest isn't even that good. I mean, I really like the pattern, but I feel like this should have been a reward way earlier, and his reward for you for this quest would have actually been something else. But I'll cover that in a little bit. The collectathon aspect of this game has to be the worst part of it, right next to the narrative. Or right behind the narrative. Yeah, I think it's right behind the narrative. Actually, based on the ending, the narrative is, distinctly worse. Sidon is thus far my favorite character, but that's to be expected out of the fish husbando from the first game. However, he spends most of his quest away from you until you get to the boss area of the Zora domain. The boss that horribly injured his father, and also there's a missable enemy in this area, I think. You only see it once, or at least I only saw it once, a sludge-like or whatever the name was. Watch out for it, it's near the very start of the questline for Sidon of the Zora. Yeah, I got that design in Metroid Prime, but it's been 21 years. They didn't even change that in the Metroid Prime remake when there were just area-exclusive enemies at one point and no other point. I think that's a terrible idea. Yeah, it just happens once in this, but it's still bad. Anyways, Sidon's dad was gravely injured after Zelda attacked from the sky. Yes, Zelda attacked. I don't recall the influence on Riju or Teba's story that Zelda had, or well, Teba's unfortunate sequel, but they probably did something entirely irrelevant to how their stories progressed normally. Probably. Look, at this point, and even before I started exploring the main quest, I knew this wasn't Zelda. There's just no way it was. I'm not going to try and pretend it's not. We've already covered she's currently a dragon, and no one's willing to respond to this fact. Sidon is, as always, your chummy chum-chum and friendly friend to the end. Even praising you as the best thing to exist to his wife. Yes, to his wife. He's gotten engaged and probably will be getting married soon. I think he actually does at the end of this. At first I thought, oh no, but I did warm up to her. And her character, and all 7 different dialogues she has. That isn't talking shit or throwing shade, but she's definitely a nice fish lady, and I do enjoy her character. I'm just disappointed there's not more of her. It's especially bad because Sidon's questline involves you handing off at least a part of his responsibility and current job of purifying the springs for the Zora to her and some of her probable compatriots. You know, I do appreciate how different each area boss is and how different each dungeon is, but since this is my last dungeon, I'll go ahead and tell you they all kinda suck. I had no enjoyment out of them, not very much at all, except for maybe Teba's unfortunate sequel questline. That dungeon and the pyramids were actually pretty fun. I got a question. Why does Sidon's dungeon have almost no swimming? Like, you get the Zora armor right before this, and it's awesome, and it allows you to swim over waterfalls and swim faster, but it plays into 0 puzzles, 0 segments, and is completely ignored in the boss fight. It's entirely optional throughout almost the whole thing. There's a small parkour segment where you have to swim up some waterfalls, and this doesn't help that this is the only real-time Sidon's ability is useful, which is a shame because Sidon is genuinely awesome. I was hyped up that the champions would be great, and the dungeons would have great puzzles, some real mind benders. But no, none of them did, not a single one. None of them offered any real challenge to me, or thought. I guess I got mildly stuck for a bit with the Rito Skyboat dungeon, but I was extremely sleep deprived, so I don't know if it was because of me being sleep deprived or it being a challenge. I'll mark it up to the sleep deprivation because the shrines are the only thing that has ever puzzled me in this game, and maybe some other outside puzzles that are kind of obtuse, but that's beside the point. That only happened a big handful of times. I'm not counting the side quests in this as puzzles because they're side quests and they have map markers. You just have to figure out which thing to press and which thing to do. It's not super hard. Okay, but why do I mention this? Because Sidon's dungeon has to be the worst for this. It's not interesting, its gimmick is neat, but it's only used once or twice in the entire game, and Sidon is absent for the vast majority of the dungeon. Hey, Big N, he's a huge fan favorite. You do him a disservice by doing this. He's only really present for maybe a few minutes at the end, and then the boss fight. It's a shame because he's a great character too, and I wanted to see more of him. I wanted to see more of both him and the Rito in general, actually. But after this, I feel less strongly towards both the fish and the bird people and Nintendo's ability to write for them. I think the problem for this comes from having to flesh them out. A thing in most of the games is that the stories are fairly linear and you can do things out of order, but it falls in line. But Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild suffer from open world syndrome, where the worlds are huge and great, but the narrative suffers from it. Elder Scrolls also has this issue, where the game world takes precedence over the story, with the story of the game individually operating as more of a means to an end rather than an aspect of the actual lore of the world and story as well. Essentially, they put the world and how you play it above actually telling a story. And Elder Scrolls has it even worse, with every entry becoming weaker in this regard over time. And I think Zelda's actually going this way too if they keep up this pattern. You see some elements of this here and there, and with the progression of time, you see more and more. But for the most part, the world operates separately from the story. There is very little lore, but lots of the world to see. Tears of the Kingdom especially suffers from this, whereas Breath of the Wild suffered only moderately because it was a new thing and not a direct sequel. Previous entries avoided suffering with this by making sure the world was only so open to allow a greater feeling of player accomplishment. Then again, the growing popularity of open worlds is a thing of grandeur and aesthetic rather than true advancement of the project. Take Dynasty Warriors 9 for example, where it was amazing to explore the massive open world of China, but the open world aspect did very little to add to the game's recurring narratives and drastically weakened the plot of new characters. It also weakened several gameplay aspects because they cut out so many different weapon classes. Both Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild drastically weakened the plot of new characters, as well as weakening the plot ever so slightly for reoccurring narratives, and even more drastically weakened it for some reoccurring narratives. And it's really a give or take because there's no real gain to the addition of story for a lot of these, especially because they flubbubbed quite a few of them. After Sidon, I thought I finally entered the endgame, but of course it has to be explained to me that the false Zelda clearly isn't Zelda. I had no idea. Look, you can only say it's for kids so many times where you have to admit to yourself it's not quality writing there. There's nothing surprising about this, and it's not me being cynical. Once more, the open world aspects of this title rock, with the narrative taking a step back for it, and that's so visible. Thinking back, Zelda has done this fake out a few times. I mean, as a series, not as a character. It's better when it's not played up as something the player shouldn't know when they could by that point very clearly. I'm pretty sure only 2 characters were convinced that it was Zelda, and one of them was a just in case. One of them was Yunobo. Yeah, that's kind of lame. He was made dumber between entries. The game even mentions several times that it can't be Zelda though, and something's wrong, especially with how she's acting and how she appears. It's way in your face about it. I can't imagine it being a surprise unless it went so in your face it looped back around to being unexpected. Just because they pushed it that hard. I could totally believe someone thinks that it's Zelda being puppeteered by Ganon, but no, it's actually just Ganon. Okay, I got really burnt out on the plot, so I went around and got more bubble gems, and more bubble frogs, and I think I got to 94 or something before I stopped jumping from cave to progress. Then I got lost in ADHD thoughts again, and hey, is that a chicken? Let's talk to the sages. Oh, Sidon's windfish treasure thing. Oh wait, no, Yunobo said to go to Terrytown. Right, I have to find the 5th sage now. Yeah, I got lost a little in the sauce. Those open world elements are just so good it's hard to not to explore willy-nilly. I felt the same about the first entry and just kept going until there was nothing left for me. I noticed some issues in cave exploration around now, so sometimes enemies disappeared for me. I thought they were despawning, but I finally saw one suddenly clip into the floor and die. They just become one with the earth once more and you lose out on loot before anyone gets mad at me for this or anyone gets on me for it. This is normal in any open world game. It just will happen inevitably. It's bad that it happens, but really you can't avoid it. I'd give them more marks on this happening as much as it does, but this is a sequel and it only has in between a 30% to 40% map size increase, with it verging on the lower end. And this doesn't happen in the 1/3 of new areas except for the cave once. It's just weird. It should happen more in the enclosed areas or in the new areas, but I don't see it as much. I'm waiting for the next new title where you can phase through the ceilings by jumping, because they used the same map again and they forgot to reapply those textures for the new port of the game on the Nintendo Switch XL. Also, they'll give Link face stubble. Yeah, Purah puts you on the path of finding the 5th sage, which I guess makes sense. But she puts you on the path of finding the dead goat lady Minoru, who was the Sage of Spirit. I don't get that. She sends you after the dead lady to find her to work for you. That doesn't make sense. Anyways, I started progressing the story again. The Secret of the Ancient Ruins, yeah, that quest. Time to go to Kakariko Village. Finally, after 140 hours, my fury can be enacted. I can explore the single remaining ring ruin, which is as simple as climbing up some ladders and using Ascend. That is very underwhelming. In fact, the whole first portion of this quest is underwhelming. You get some honestly terrible armor and weird lore here, but that Zonai team leader guy, the one with the abs to die for, returns, so I can't complain. Anyways, this dispels the thunderstorm on an island I accidentally visited way too early. Oops, I defeated the construct there and got a map to the underground. I got a little too confident in myself there. I thought maybe for a while I could get through the area without progressing, but I was locked behind progression because I'm not that good, and I am a scrub. Anyways, this was cool. The puzzle to get it was alright. The shrines still hold the puzzle torch. Seriously, I had no fun with the puzzles in those dungeons. A friend told me you can get up to Dragonhead Sky Islands by using rewind on some falling rubble from the Sky Islands, but I took a hard pass on that and instead did it the stupid way. I failed once doing this, but only once, and I thought it was a lot of fun. This series of islands is in of itself a dungeon. If people could agree on it being a dungeon, it would be my favorite one, but I can't wholly call it a dungeon since it doesn't fit the criteria. It is, however, absolutely fantastic. The way the Sky Islands are used here made me want to explore and hop around and see all the nooks and crannies. To paint the walls in construct blood, which, is just oil. Probably. I know I'm here for the 5th sage and all that. There was a cave here filled with likes. Nah, I'll pass on that. I already looted it before when I tried to explore in my hubris. I just had to find the sage's wills, which I looked up ahead of time. I was only missing 2, which is cool, I think, anyways. I did all of this within a few hours, played around, maybe ate the whole day. It all started to blur together, the collectibles. Well, I do know I got them all. Almost all. Damn those Korok seats. Anyway, I got to the end of the islands and the thunderstorm broke. It was a beautiful sight, though at this point nothing is a trial for me unless self-imposed. I suppose I still felt relief that the storm was over and I could go back to using my normal weapons. It was the light at the long end of a multiple real-life day journey. I could finally experience release soon. I did expect a boss fight here, but I was disappointed there's no boss. I went along into a large open room after grabbing the last sage's will. That large open room had an owl mask in the middle. I was hoping at this point for a plot twist where your sage would be Kepora Gebora once more, like from Ocarina of Time. That would be a really cool reference, but no, it's the ghost of Minoru who's been hiding in your Purapad, whatever. Apparently she was sleeping there, waiting for the right time to awaken. I guess cool, within the next 2 hours I'll beat the game. She is the most last-minute addition I could imagine, and up until this point, I could not have predicted it. I'll give it credit there. I would not have thought they'd do this. I literally thought the dead owl made more sense. It even seemed to add up to a point with the owl and dragon motifs. I don't know. Just, why the dead goat lady? I've seen people say they actually enjoy her plot, but I've got to ask why. For most of the game, you don't see anything from her. She's got maybe 2 story cutscenes that are probably under 10 minutes each in a game that is over 100 hours long. Her reveal as a companion makes almost no sense, and you have no connection to this character. I guess it's kind of cool. But if they're going so hard on nostalgia, even in appearance, why didn't they just go the rest of the way? I'm not really a super huge fan of Ocarina of Time, actually, but, I can see that that's what they're going for here. And honestly, it's probably just because they had this really cool idea for how she wanders the world, and even though she's dead, and it's because she's this really awesome construct. Yeah, you transfer her spirit or whatever, however it works, into the construct body to inhabit. And sure, it moves slow as hell, but it really is just so cool. It's big, it's electric, it's kind of like the Flux constructs, but like small and owly and less blocky. You can actually ride Minoru, not like that, in the game, as you've probably seen me doing in my clips here. It's actually really awesome. You get to pilot a giant mech construct inhabited by a goat spirit. That is metal as hell. The weapons you get to use while riding Minoru's construct is essentially every Zonai device, and I didn't test most regular fusion parts, so I don't know how compatible they are. I'm going to assume they're by default compatible. Minoru is just awesome to play as and to use, I guess, whichever thing you'd prefer, because technically she's inhabiting a robot. But there's also the problem that she hits like paper airplanes in the eye. Sure, it hurts, but it's not actually going to do much damage unless you use real thick or real thin papers. But she hits like paper. Sure, it can hurt in paper airplane format if it hits you in the eye, but it really isn't too damaging unless you use real thick or real thin papers. The best things to put on her, in my experience, are flamethrowers and really big blunt objects, like, well, I guess it's not blunt, but the giant spike balls in her boss arena. Even after you max her out, this is generally the way to go if you put anything on her, because she's just not that strong. Of the 5 sages you have exploring with you, Yunobo is the most used because he can smash through pebblets, break walls, block every attack, an overall good party member. I think Sidon can do those too, but I didn't see him do it much, aside from breaking walls. And then there's Minoru, who can do everything that everyone else can do except Sidon. I guess she can't call down lightning or cause gusts of wind, but I mean in combat otherwise. She's great for traversal of the overworld, just not for combat. If you want to make her efficient, that's another 2 fusions every time the ones you have on her break. And they break pretty quickly. Just fight on your own and use her for short-term mobility, like rockets for jumping high, or fans for running really fast. Maybe gliders glide? I don't know. I didn't test that one. Minoru is the weakest addition to the Sage crew, and she bestows upon you most of her powers, or something like that, whatever it is in the story. I'm tired at the time of writing this, and I don't remember at the time of reading this. It'll be a clip on screen what she does. It's a cutscene, so it's a spoiler, but at this point, I think you're well acquainted with that. Now, aside from Minoru being really cool, you actually have to assemble her yourself, which feels like it's just there to pad out the game time because it doesn't give you any options to assemble her, just the defaults. It's kinda lame, and the puzzles to get the parts are also so simple I overthought them, believing there to be some advanced meaning to the areas they're in. However, like I said, riding on Minoru is awesome. Not like that. It really is a blast to launch yourself or run at insane speeds. It reminds me of the motorcycle that they either cut or I never got. Feel free to tell me about that in the comments below. It's not significant, but I'm interested to know if it's there. Though, please don't include that it's my fault for missing it if it is there. Come on, guys. This game is so huge, people just found out there are pumpkins in it. So at this point, I'm about 150 hours into the game. Not accounting for time spent just on the pause menu. I don't know how exactly long that was. I just wanted this game to be done, and I hate to say it, but Tears of the Kingdom did what Breath of the Wild really couldn't. It overstayed its welcome. I guess play it casually, guys, but I really can't imagine returning to this title anytime in the future. Minoru's Shrine of Spirit questline, or whatever it actually is pretty nice in how short it is. If played right, it's less than 20 minutes, far faster than the others, and far less repetitive because of this. In the shortness of it, it's also far more original. It mostly operates as a tutorial for how to use Minoru's constructs, but it feels natural and not at all in your face about it past the first part. And that's really good. Most of the game really fails at this. It's at this point that I want to point out that the sages don't really serve a purpose. Every single scene with them is like, now hold on, we're gonna see the past version, and the past version is gonna say, wow, future version, you've gotta help this guy defeat the big bad. And that's almost their whole story arc. Sometimes the cutscenes are like 7 minutes or so long where they just wind down to telling you that. The same thing every time. Even Minoru does it. Except she is the past one in this occasion. Ah well, moving on. I'll save more of that for later. At this point, or maybe just before it, I wrapped up a ton of side quests, and then I got burnt out on those after a deer I was riding to turn in a quest got killed by bokoblins. Because the deer didn't want to listen to my pleas to guide it to safety. It turned a complete 180. I don't think I did any more side quests. Not from here, at least, anyways. Because, my god, that was incredibly demoralizing. I was less than 30 meters away. I guess technically that is an immediate lie, because then I just went right on to complete the Bubble Gym side quest, Bubble Frog thing, and watched a dude turn into a bloopy. There is no sound here because I accidentally didn't connect the thing, or the thing didn't connect. One or the other for audio. It doesn't actually matter, and I think I played the Wii Shop channel music in this. Oops. At least it's not like when I played the Primapule squeaking videos or speaking videos. I'll live. The videos are unlisted and there's 7 days of unedited footage. There's one point where I forgot to adjust the audio and it's so loud it's more than inhumanly painful. I just uploaded those as proof that I did complete the game more than anything else, and also for footage for this review. Otherwise I'd have several hundred gigabytes of footage just sitting around on my PC. Something I have almost literally no space for. After watching this man silently turn into a bloopy, something most players will hunt with vigor, I tell his brother about it, who proclaims he should be happy by now. I don't think so, no. After this, I will make great effort to blast every bloopy I see within the next hour and a half. Which is none. I never see any more for the rest of the game. The reward for this quest is really lame because all you get at the very end is a paraglider texture recolor. And yeah, I think it's probably the best one, but it didn't need to be this way. Why are all the completion rewards this? I don't get it. Alright, the last hour and a half is mostly just running from one spot to another. There's some cutscenes with Purah and the rest of the crew. I make sure to thank Purah's assistant because that kid warms my heart with her kindly determination. When I do engage in combat, it is entirely because I have to do so in order to progress, or because I get too mad about having my progress halted by stun locking ice keys. No, these guys were placed here for this purpose, because otherwise this final stretch under Hyrule Castle would have taken 5 minutes until the enemy gauntlet. They needed to stun lock you to make the game last. During the very final stretch though, you dive through a copied and pasted staircase from the upper level of Hyrule Castle and lose your sage powers. Oh no. At first I wondered how I could do this, but then I recalled a joke I made with my wife much earlier in the game. We would win through the power of friendship. Can you guess what happens? You all die. No, you win through the power of friendship, okay? At least in this game, Purah called the sages here, so it makes sense. Minoru is the only one who makes no sense to suddenly show up because you already have her construct with you most of the time. However, they all show up and get little introductions for why they're there. All the introductions before the enemy gauntlet, which is what they show up for, especially Minoru's, are kinda cringe. I think Sidon is the only one I really enjoyed as an introduction here, but they're wholly unnecessary, and it could just play out in the combat itself, and it would mean so much more if they didn't take away your control to do this. The enemy gauntlet is also incredibly disappointing. I wanted a boss gauntlet. I did have someone inform me after writing this that there is a boss gauntlet. You just don't get any of the sages, and you have to fight the bosses. I don't know if that's 100% accurate, I haven't checked for myself, but if that's how it works, why doesn't it work a different way? Have those guys take out the enemies and you take out the bosses, well, one at a time anyways, with them specifically. And that would have made the scene a whole lot more impactful. And that's just such a simple rewrite too. You don't need to change any of the rest of the story for that to work out. Instead, if you have all the sages with you, Ganondorf spawns in a bunch of bosses in a cutscene, and then seals you off from helping the other sages with those boss fights. Look, I could beat those bosses within 2 minutes. And some of them I beat within 2 minutes of their introductions. But all of them at once, one-on-one, that just sounds awesome. Maybe I'll actually be challenged in the later portions of this game. It feels really weird I got punished from doing the more fun thing because I decided to actually play the story. Well, the parts they didn't make me play. Instead, just a bunch of enemies spawn in, slowly increasing in quantity, and the health bar for, the enemy gauntlet decreases a little slower with every wave. They also don't get stronger with your level, remaining as blue grade enemies, which is the second grade of enemy. They better release a proper hard mode update or something. Maybe there already is one and I missed it or whatever, but this was so underwhelming. The funny thing is, the start of the game is a bit too challenging during combat, but with enough effort you become entirely broken really quickly. And once more, why am I mentioning this now? Because I completely sweeped through Ganon in less than the amount of time it takes me to beat some of the bosses seen in the previous cutscene. To make it worse, I didn't dodge his attacks really except for maybe once or twice, and I just tanked the rest of them to the face because he doesn't do enough damage to even threaten me. It's a shame, he has these cool attacks, the same inventory system it looks like at least, and equipment swapping as Link does. The works. But you never get to see it if you play a Zelda game like it's typically played, by doing everything you can. Now during the second stage of the fight, or at least maybe the 2.5 stage of the fight, because the second stage has 2 stages, that's a thing, the sages come back to help you. Because Ganon spawns in 5 other versions of himself, so they're all fighting, but not really. It's entirely unnecessary if you're prepared at all for this boss. Or if you've done everything that you'd normally do like in a Zelda game. With or without their help, I sweep through Ganon. I don't know how much they did. I think all they actually did at the end of the day from memory, it might not be that way in footage, is operating as shields for me. That's it, simply that. Literally, in the case of Sidon, that's his whole shtick. There's also this really comical moment when Ganon's health bar refills to full, and then about 2.5 times that amount, extending to the edge of the screen. Me and my wife were laughing at this, it's hilarious. All this did was make him more of a damage sponge though. I still didn't dodge his attacks. I mean, I tried to just to see if I could flurry rush him, and then he flurry rushed me. That was so cool. But then I just tanked his attacks to the face and kept attacking him and got right through the second form with insane amounts of ease. How did they do this in 2 different games where they made Ganon this giant intimidating force, but when you actually fight him, he doesn't have any intimidation to him at all? And I played hard mode in Breath of the Wild 1, I did. I went and fought Ganon, and I still didn't struggle. This is the worst interpretation of Ganon in probably the whole of the Zelda series, except for the CDI games, but we don't talk about those. And from here, Ganon moves on to his 3rd and final stage. However, it takes on a new form. And I say it because Ganon isn't worth being given personhood. Ganon swallows his Magatama of power, or whatever it is in this game, and turns into a giant dragon called the Demon Dragon. It's super massive, it's bigger than every other dragon in the game. And then Dragon Zelda sweeps in to help you out. I know I haven't really talked about the Magatama things at all, but those are in the game. They return from Skyward Sword. They're not a new addition. They're new in what they do and how they perform in the game, but otherwise, Also, the lore for how they operate is entirely new, and they don't really care about it. I'll talk more about that later. They're just there. Anyways, Ganon turns into a supermassive dragon after eating a glowy doodad that was entirely irrelevant to the vast majority of the story. But these are actually what cause your companions to be able to travel around with you while also staying in their village. It just summons a sage form or spirit form that follows you around. I did talk about the spirit form. Every time I got one of the sages to come with me, it was one of those spirits. With very few exceptions, such as Mineru's construct always following us around, and technically that being Mineru, but not really. I don't know how that one works, because she inhabits the construct. Anyways, it didn't serve any purpose other than to distract enemies in the final area, so it didn't matter. Actually, they barely served any purpose at all throughout the game except for destroying obstacles, which I just found out Riju can do. I didn't know that. I wish I did. I wish I utilized that better. And this is entirely shot in the foot though, because the sages aren't available during the vast majority of the final fights in the game. And they even cut you off from experiencing better fights. Yeah, that's pretty bad. And they're not usable at all during the fight against the giant demon dragon Ganon turns into. Except for Zelda, I guess, because she is the Sage of Time, because that's a thing they put into the game and then almost never used. I actually entirely forgot to write about that because it's wholly irrelevant. The music in these final segments, though, is actually the best in the entire title, even if they're mostly remixed songs from previous entries. Actually, the music during the whole game has been amazing. When I realized the Rito theme was a remix of the theme from Wind Waker, I genuinely had my eyes water. It's nice to know that the origins of the characters aren't forgotten, even if they're not written well. However, I didn't enjoy the new songs in the game. I guess I'll talk about that more when I break down how I feel about it. So I fought the Demon Dragon and it wasn't a challenge at all. After defeating him, the Goat King and his not goat wife come to save Link's wife and or girlfriend, whichever it is. Which he and Zelda have to be doing things with each other at night? Come on, they share a bed. I guess just enjoy that information. I don't know what else to tell you. Anyways, that's the most enjoyment I got out of this ending. The joking with my wife about it. Ganon in his demon dragon form re-enters the infinite reincarnation cycle via nuclear explosion. Yeah, it looks cool, but oh my god, it's over the top more than any other Zelda game. It feels like they really wanted that Grandula appearance at the end here and gave up on a challenging boss, because all it took was time, and I remained unchallenged at all throughout the entire boss fight. Anyways, after the boss fight ends, the original rulers of Hyrule, yeah, they don't just show up and save Zelda. No, she didn't really need saving. They turn her back from a dragon into a Hylian, restore Link's missing arm, and strip his shirt and helmet for some reason? I guess if you're into that, but it's kinda weird. It really did come out of nowhere. I don't know how they put Link's arm back on or why they didn't do that before. I don't know why they restored Zelda. Maybe if Impa had made a breakthrough in her research at any point in the game, but that didn't happen. Even if she had, this would be a huge Deus Ex Machina and entirely invalidates any of the loss experienced throughout the title, because no one would have known about her breakthrough, other than Link. He can't pass it on to the dead people who aren't there. This ending invalidates not only this game, but Breath of the Wild, because Zelda's already an immortal dragon, and the events of Breath of the Wild really don't seem to need to happen because yes, you lose yourself when you turn into a dragon, but Zelda seems to have still a portion of herself and explicitly targets the demon dragon and helps Link. I don't get it. Why did they entirely ignore the lore for this? Unless they're gonna just write it off as, oh yes, she retains some of herself, but not enough. But even then, that's still a retcon. And it's not a good one. By turning Zelda back into a Hylian, yes, you get a good ending, but you lose any consequences to one's actions. Some would argue this is predetermined by the series lore, but it's definitely not because, well, it just doesn't make any sense. There's nothing that says Zelda has to remain a Hylian. She could have been like a half-dragon form, just because. That's it. Sure, they probably have plans for the story in the future and a third game, but this sets a returning precedent. In the first entry, in the new Zelda style, this kind of ending kinda made sense. I guess if I take a look back at Breath of the Wild, the whole goal is to save Zelda and beat Ganon. Neither party suffered from an affliction preventing either of these things from happening. Having Zelda suddenly be able to be saved completely and totally invalidates a majority of the story's complications. It's insulting to the player's intelligence, even if they're just kids. At what point does bad writing become too bad even for kids? At what point does bad narrative design become accepted? And someone did point out to me that Zelda becomes human again to continue the Royal Hyrule line, even though in more than one timeline, even the hero is gone, then the Hyrule line isn't technically there. I don't understand this argument because it feels like it's just a cop-out that Nintendo would have to do, or a person trying to like rationalize this problem that's created in the lore, because this is just bad writing. They don't need Zelda for a Legend of Zelda game. There are some Zelda games without a Zelda. And many of those games are actually more highly regarded than the main series in a lot of instances, with one of them recently getting a port to the Switch, which is Link's Awakening. The only staple to the series, other than Wand of Gamelon, is playing as Link. And you still don't even need that, in my opinion, because in Wind Waker, you don't technically play as Link, you make him become the hero. Look, even Breath of the Wild had this issue, but it wasn't as bad because it was a story that stood on its own. If this title wasn't connected to Breath of the Wild as a direct sequel, it would probably be much better, or way more acceptable at least. But who am I kidding? Anytime I bring up this criticism to people question if I actually played the game, or tell me it's for kids. Therefore, it doesn't need to be intellectually honest or well written, with a handful of exceptions. I'm not going to be convincing anyone that's already convinced it's amazing, or there's absolutely zero problem with it being written like this for some arbitrary reason. It's just bad, guys, and yeah, that's okay to criticize. This is a problem that is suffered by most open world titles, or at least a majority of open world titles. However, Tears of the Kingdom's predecessor, Breath of the Wild, had far less of this issue. There's a boon to linear storytelling that's actually lost in allowing this much freedom, something that Breath of the Wild countered by letting you go beat the final boss within minutes of starting the game. That was a good thing that it did, not a bad thing, but people seem to think that being able to rapidly beat the game like that is bad, and therefore Tears of the Kingdom speedruns are 1.5 hours long instead of 1/3 to 1/2 hours long. Though that was at launch, it has since changed to be almost the same time as Breath of the Wild speedruns, so we're likely to see it decrease again. But some people believe that since it took so long, it was better. No, it was just new. I would honestly say the way this game handles the ability to go and rush into the final area is worse, because it forces you to experience the honestly very poorly written plot that's just there to capitalize on the success of Breath of the Wild. I mentioned linear storytelling being better for the kind of adventure the devs were going for here, and I want to bring as an example past entries of the series. The critically well-regarded Twilight Princess has its issues, but by being a linear story in a semi-open world, they can more directly gear events to slow realizations and build-ups, and make the progression of unlocking upgrades more rewarding due to effort put into getting them. You also see bombastic cinematic designs without it being forced on you, or the final boss dying via nuclear explosion because you poked his weak points enough. That's still gonna be a mystery to me. You know, at one point there was a fan animation, and I think it was a machinima, so it's now gone from the internet forever, where Zelda tried to seal or execute Ganondorf in the throne room of Hyrule Castle. Maybe that is from some sort of Twilight Princess associated merchandise, but I haven't been able to find it anywhere. I thought that was canon for years. Why am I talking about this? Because there's an actual execution scene for Ganon in Twilight Princess. Ganon's execution scene in Twilight Princess is one of the most intense scenes in that game because Ganon gets impaled. He's chained to a giant obsidian-esque block. The impalement doesn't work. He pulls out the weapon at the end of the cutscene and uses it as his own weapon, and I believe he goes on to use that as the final boss too. When Ganon gets impaled, he starts laughing in that game. And then he rips the cuffs that contain him onto the obsidian wall behind him straight off, and he kills one of the guys that tried to execute him. Yeah, they technically win by sealing him away in a different dimension, but that doesn't last. That Ganon alone is proof that you don't need to make him a giant dragon to make the final boss intimidating. I get why they did it, but it's so unnecessary, especially the death by a nuclear explosion. A better way the scene could have played out is if they'd also turned Ganon back into a Gerudo. Yes, the giant dragon boss fight is cool, but it's so easy. You just fly up in the air, dive bomb, attack again, and his attacks are so easy to avoid, you would have to intentionally dodge into them to get hit by them. The point I'm making here is that Dragon Ganon isn't that difficult, and I don't think he'd be that difficult even on a hard mode simply because he's not programmed to hit you. His attacks aren't targeted, they're generalized to a specific area, and if one hits you, I would honestly say that it is your fault that you got hit by it. Technically, that is true of any game, but via comparison to other Zelda games, this Ganon isn't that tough. He's really easy to avoid. If you're having trouble, just hold up your shields and block him the whole time. I took most of his damage to the face like that, where I just walked right at him with my shield up. He got through one shield. I didn't even have the best shields in the game. It was a significantly more fun and better boss fight when you are more limited, because otherwise, the Demon King becomes a joke. Look, I don't even like Twilight Princess that much. I genuinely prefer Wind Waker and the stylization in those, but that sent chills down my spine as a kid. And as an adult, it is beyond badass, and it's completely understandable because that's just how Ganon is, or at least was. If these are the same Ganon, you're never supposed to have this guy on the back foot. This version of Ganon would never, ever go, no, how could I be losing? Let me just lose my entire sense of self. He's too prideful, he's too arrogant for that. That's a huge portion of his character lost in both Breath of the Wild and Breath of the Wild 1.5, otherwise known as Tears of the Kingdom. And as far as I'm aware, it's the only interpretation like that. The change itself isn't a bad thing, but it's a bad thing it changed in this direction. You can humanize Ganon in different ways. Maybe in flashbacks, instead of having him be the all-powerful evil entity that he is, you could also have soft moments where he's taking care of his horse. Maybe he has a particular fondness of a specific Gerudo. That wouldn't be that hard to do in the flashbacks. This is just a terrible way to make him show weakness. It comes out of nowhere and invalidates his character just to make the player feel better. And yes, it's cool, but that doesn't mean it's well written. These are kind of supposed to be the same Ganon, right? I don't know why he's changed so much, either way. I mentioned Wind Waker, so let's also take a look at that as an example. In Wind Waker, you're just an ordinary kid. I'm not even kidding. The Link from the Wind Waker timeline is just a kid, and eventually becomes the goddess's chosen. This is the timeline where the Ocarina of Time Link failed, and his soul just doesn't exist anymore. The goddesses decided to prove old-timey deists right, and just gave up. This is built up through the story, and you even technically save Zelda, who is a badass pirate captain in this version. She saves you more than you save her, though, but it's the thought that counts, I guess. Your sister is kidnapped because in this world, Ganon doesn't know who Zelda is anymore. Just she's got pointy ears and is within a specific age range. He's just kidnapping every girl of Hylian descent to try and get all the power he can before Link or Zelda show up, by maybe taking Zelda out of the equation or taking her Triforce. It's not really a point worth bringing up in this breakdown here. However, because of this, and because of Ganon's actions, you actually fall into his trap and unseal his power by taking the Master Sword. Then you have to go and bring the Master Sword back to its original full power to even stand a chance. Because he took that too. And Zelda. There's some pretty big similarities you probably see in this plot right now. Let's top that off with, you also work with Zelda to defeat Ganon in this game too. But this time it's reasonable and makes more sense because Zelda is actually in control of her actions and knows what she's doing. Because, as a reminder, the Tears of the Kingdom version lost her sense of self entirely and became a mindless beast upon turning into a dragon. That was the established canon, established in this very game, that they defy themselves just to make the scene look cool. And it does look really awesome, but there's other ways you could have gone about this. Maybe Zelda didn't need to lose her sense of self. Maybe she just felt she had a duty to patrol the outskirts of Hyrule and came back when the time was right. Maybe dragons don't need to lose their sense of selves upon turning into those big things, but The implication being that there's 3 huge dragons from people that have also ate the weird Magatama of power things. The spirit stones, the whatever stone they ate, that's another piece of lore they haven't really addressed. Anyways, I'm getting mad at that. You also kill Ganon entirely in the Wind Waker timeline. He's forever sealed on the sea floor and never appears again in the timeline. You do this by stabbing him in the head after a long battle where you must use every skill you've gained throughout your journey to best the Demon King. Mostly like in Tears of the Kingdom in that you stab Ganon in the head. In Wind Waker, after stabbing in the head, the dead king of Hyrule floods the Old Kingdom. And the series of events is amazing and beautifully played out, and it really made me feel sad. I went back to Wind Waker a lot, not because it's my favorite, but because it's well written, and the gameplay itself is very rewarding to go through. The ending scene is rendered with in-game graphics, letting the old world be flooded before your eyes. Before you're saved by Zelda's pirate crew, you didn't need a nuclear explosion to make an impactful ending. In fact, if anything, it makes it less impressive because nothing really mattered. The immortal dragon is dead, and a 10,000-year struggle against Ganon is done, because that's how the Chosen One plot plays out. You also get the ultimate good ending, because you just do. In Wind Waker, you suffer the tragedy of watching everything that you actually loved about a past entry disappearing. And yeah, that did make some fans mad, but it makes sense, and it's well written into the plot. In comparison, in Tears of the Kingdom, not only do you not need to use every skill you've gained, because you almost gain no skills, you can just coast through the title if you go through and meticulously gather things like you would in other Zelda games. No matter what you do, you'll be rewarded with success. So getting all the shrines feels like an active detriment to taking on the final boss or the final boss's area because it doesn't scale with the player like almost everywhere else does. But even then, after a while, I didn't struggle taking on any enemy force at all, just coasting through every single thing in the game. In previous titles, you need to get everything you can to stand a chance. That's not really true anymore, and it makes him being the biggest bad to have ever existed feel not true. There's a level of narrative dissonance applied that steals away the impact of Ganon being as strong as he is, because they tell you he's super strong, and then he's just not. It's more like that one friend from high school bragging about how cool he is, but he's really just an idiot. And he's not as strong as he says he is. That's Ganon in this entry. Or was that a friend from middle school? I haven't been in either of those in a very long time. Yeah, in this entry, you don't really need to get everything to deal with Ganondorf. The upgrades you get can't even be used on the way to the final boss, except for maybe inventory upgrades if you want to count that. So your skills aren't really useful, the weapons you bring aren't really useful. It doesn't matter how much health you have if you can just slightly sidestep or if you have a good enough shield. It doesn't matter your stamina because in the final segment of the game, pretty much no stamina is actually consumed. Though there is a point where it forces you more than once to grind out stamina to be able to acquire story progress, which causes a little bit of dissonance because imagine if you're playing this just for the story and then they're like, oh hey, by the way, you have to go do this other thing, which won't matter by the end of the game. It only matters for exploration and not much else. It's at this point I feel it's good to mention that anyone that I talk to that played the game for the story, the majority of them quit by just over half. If I could fraction it, it would be 4 out of 7. You have to stop everything to do what the developers suddenly decide is the right thing to do. I've seen the argument that you don't need to get everything to succeed, but that's just not how you play Zelda games typically. And so most people will go get everything and then sweep through the final boss. On another note, and finally moving on from this, I've seen people say that you don't need to play Breath of the Wild to play Tears of the Kingdom, and sure, you don't. There are some story aspects that would be lost on you, but it would probably make the experience better if you didn't, because taking into how almost the same plot elements happen in Breath of the Wild almost verbatim, The sages joining you at the end and the build up to unlocking their skills is a bit tired already just in the second entry, especially because they couldn't find a way to write them in other than every single one of them going, "I must help you now, because I must." Most of the time, I just wanted the skills to make exploration easier, and for most of the sages, their ways of making things easier actually came from being able to purchase items in their towns rather than acquiring skills from them. I'll go out on a limb to say that since they have no character other than pushing the story forward after completing their portion of the main story, Riju, Sidon, and Minoru are almost entirely pointless. If you're playing right, you won't need their abilities, and the Zonai devices will be much cooler and more fun to use to get around. Otherwise, you just grab items in the domains of these sages and you're good to go. This is a noticeable downgrade from how excited I was to get the skills of the former champions and see their stories play out. The comparison makes Tears of the Kingdom significantly weaker as a narrative, and maybe weaker in gameplay as well if you just want to get the abilities, because only one or two of them really serve a point. Anyway, now that I've ranted about how much the game's narrative sucks, let's talk about the ending. After Zelda is returned to being a Hylian, she starts falling from the sky and you have to race to catch up to her in a QTE button mashing contest. There's a really funny moment where you grab Zelda's hand like you're shaking your hand, and that made me and my wife laugh. And then you land in a lake. I remind you once more, you've been stripped of everything on your upper half by Rauru and Sonia. It's weird, but enjoy your fan service of a wet Link. The lake you land in is the same one that you started the game diving into on the surface, and everyone is happy to see you. Now we're on to what feels like a 15-minute credit sequence, followed by a true ending cutscene that I actually didn't know I had to get anything to achieve because I actually completed the main story. Everyone gets together to have a moment just outside the Temple of Time on the island in the sky you started on. Not the one on the Great Plateau, I know you might have forgotten, the writers seem to have. In this scene, the new sages and champions, the descendants of the original 4 champions in Breath of the Wild, swear their fealty to Zelda. This would have been a fun moment and really cool if they didn't play it around for like a found family kind of joke. They mess up the ritual and have a laugh, then have a very awkward pause that was probably unintentionally awkward, and then finish the ritual. After that, Minoru says her time is up because it just is, and her spirit finally passes on. See, I actually felt bad here. As much as I disliked the Zonai being added to the lore, Minoru didn't deserve what she got. The last technically living Zonai is now dead, having waited 10,000 years for the right time. She only got to live a few more days to see Ganon defeated, and didn't even really get to help because the writers and game developers decided it couldn't happen because they didn't scale the game properly to allow further character development. That's just tragic, and yes, she is a very tragic character, but this is a different kind of tragic. The fact she's a tragic character is actually kind of a good thing. It reinforces a more positive narrative point of the plot. And I mean that generalized, not a specific narrative point. The absolute biggest part of this tragedy is just how mishandled she was. In fact, most of the new sages were. Most of the plot was. However, with that, the game is over now. Look, as much as I absolutely despise the new narrative direction of the series, there's just so much content and so much to explore and see. The open world is single-handedly the best aspect of these 2 Switch titles, and will likely remain the best aspect of the games going forward if Nintendo chooses to go this direction consistently. That's fine, but I'm going to miss actual and proper storytelling that prior entries did have. A more direct and more linear storyline would benefit the series greatly, and maybe even a post-game because they still don't have that for some reason. That's a great frustration for me. I would absolutely love it to be able to go and maybe have a comfy cottage date with Zelda as Link, or hang out with Teba and his kid and maybe actually form a bond with them and maybe learn his kid's name, because I legitimately cannot be bothered to remember. Attending Sidon's wedding would be amazing, but it's just not there. It has dawned on me by this point that the game is just simply so big, even the most experienced players in the game will miss out on a lot of lore because of the absurd size. If you're not thorough enough, and that would be a good thing, it serves to heighten your experience because being too thorough will certainly worsen your experience with both titles. A way you could excuse having a postgame in the lore is that Ganon's malice is still causing figments of all the creatures and big bads to appear, and we'd still get that postgame. In fact, they could have done that with the previous game too, and I don't know why they didn't, especially since the malice seems to still be so strong under Hyrule Castle that having it leak out would make a lot of sense. I keep going on about it, but the narrative design is just so bad, it's suffering. It's sad to see a series with such amazing narrative design take a backstep. And this is accepted by fans. I get it, the game is amazing and deserves the vast majority of praises it gets, but the writing actually serves as a detriment to the title. A game series that even the spin-offs are well written, even in Hyrule Warriors. Every version of it handled the power of friendship plot a lot better because it was unexpected, and that made it so much immensely cooler and more emotional when it happened. Normally, I try looking at these games in a vacuum, and I get that, but it's hard to honestly nigh impossible to do that when the series has such a rich history and it's made by such a wealthy company. If past entries of semi-open world design are less interactive but make more sense, I'll take that over this. As it stands, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom exist entirely off of references to previous games. They tried to fix that by introducing the Zonai, but what it really caused is so many more problems because the Zonai actually work as a retcon to Twilight Princess because the Uka were already the people of the sky. With that being said, I do appreciate all the returning enemies, locations, and various creatures. I think that's cool, and it's cool to be able to explore the world with these in it. I mean, hell, Lynels hadn't been seen since Zelda 1, and Gleeoks have been missing for a super long time too. I just wish I got to experience what it's like to actually live in the world. Instead, we're elevated to an extent we could never really experience it, an issue the first game didn't have. I also still think this could have been a DLC. Nintendo even remarked that it began as a DLC. So they did just that, but they made it its own game. Tears of the Kingdom is only about 30% larger than Breath of the Wild. It feels bigger than that due to how the terrain is formatted. It's really hard to get around this game, and you spend way more time grinding for resources than in the previous entry, any previous entry. It's rewarding to get to places, but the required grinding for getting even near 100% is a task that threatens sanity, a problem I didn't experience in Breath of the Wild because it had far less collectibles, and the world was also smaller. While my playtimes for these two games are actually really close, I feel like the grinding in Tears of the Kingdom is there to pad out time, like some of the ending scenes that explain to you what you already know in verbose detail. If the world is between 30 to 40% bigger, why did I beat it faster by 25 hours with all the grinding I had to do? If I didn't need to do any of the grinding, I would have beaten it way sooner. I'm probably guessing around 20 to 40 hours sooner. As it currently stands, I beat it 25 hours quicker than I beat Breath of the Wild. And to make it worse, grinding is an entirely mindless experience once you figure out where to go and what to do, and how to do it. Essentially, just go to the same spot, rest for 7 days, go back and do it again. That's all you need to do to accomplish all your grinding. Sure, it's great if you don't think about it. At least it's pretty, and I mean that with genuine seriousness. The graphics are amazing. The game does slow down sometimes trying to render them, but it's worth it in this case. I wouldn't normally say that, but the game is really and truly astoundingly pretty. Sometimes I turn on pro mode just to admire the vast vistas that we're given. That's some amazing wow factor there, but you don't get as much of it as in the depths. It's too hard to get around or to get height to get a good vista. But I do like the ones you get down there too, especially I love the overlook on the underground lakes. Those are so pretty. Speaking of the depths, I really didn't talk about them much, did I? I'm just realizing that now that I'm reading off the script. They're cool, and I like exploring them. Much like the overworld, it's pretty big, being 29% of the 30% increase in size. I once more call back to Fallout New Vegas. The map is small, but it's fun to explore, and there's plenty to do. Sure, it's narratively vacant in the case of Tears of the Kingdom, with most things being placed because they look cool, and lore clearly being added after they realized people would be interested, but it is fun. It's more like a playground of combat and mining. The rewards you get for exploring the depths aren't really worth it, just flat out, I'll tell you that. The armor you get for it is subpar, the weapons you get break very quickly, and it costs you loads of precious materials needed for exploring the overworld. The good news is you get most of the rewards just from finding the light roots and the mines, with some treasures and farming spots that respawn every 7 in-game days existing nearby them. However, the reason I didn't talk about the depths is because the depths don't need to be here either. Most of the story could have existed in the Sky Islands or the overworld. The depths are just here to be here? I'm not kidding, there's no reason for them to be here. How did people not notice these massive ravines filled with ore? It doesn't make any sense, especially the ancient Sheikah. There should have been better manuscripts and notes taken and visual representations, but there's not. They're just suddenly added to this game because they needed a new area to explore. This game would have been made extremely better if it wasn't a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild. Maybe if it was a prequel, it would have actually been better than this. Maybe the previous Link and Zelda had this adventure, not the current ones. Most characters that are introduced or reintroduced serve little to no purpose in this title and prove themselves almost entirely useless to making anything happen without you to help. The Zonai survey team is a cool idea and introduction, and their leader is hot as hell, but he just exposits every time he's on screen. The only reason he's there is to give you information that you could find via pretty much any other means. Ignore the voice crack, that was on purpose, I swear. I don't have congestion, you have congestion. His assistant, or whoever the old bald guy is much the same. He doesn't need to be there. The two Zonai themselves could have been swapped out for another existing race, and it would have been more enjoyable to anyone already familiar with the series. Hell, it could have just been another Hylian. It could have been the decayed corpse of another Hylian that you get the arm of. There you go. I do personally stand by it being an Uka, as they already had a humanoid form planned out at one point or another. As I also said, they are already the people of the sky too, so it just doesn't make sense that they're not here. You don't have to have them be king or queen, they can just be co-founders and advisors and still fill the major role of Minoru if you want to keep them alive. You don't need to change the Zonai lore, just change it to an Uka, as a lot of that lore is already in Twilight Princess. It's just not the Zonai. Instead, they made new lore with very similar backgrounds. I see a few people arguing in favor of this being the plot we got, so we have to live with it, but it's still worthy of criticism, and putting it out there that we could have gone different ways really helps Nintendo make another game, especially because they seem to be wanting to make a third game with this because everything came out really happy when it shouldn't have. You could have also had the Zonai be a branch of the Sheikah, since they seem to dislike them for no real reason anyways. In case you forgot, that is the lore the Sheikah give to the Zonai in Breath of the Wild, and a bit in this entry as well, calling them barbaric. I guess the Sheikah were just a little bit racist back then. Or you could take a different direction. Having the Zonai instead be a different branch of the Sheikah from prehistory, you give them a reason to call them barbaric. Because they're breakaways, they're people that they wouldn't like because they're by default a group that already didn't like being there. They can even be added as a thing that happens slightly after Skyward Sword, the originator of the game series timeline. At some point, they just broke off, and in Tears of the Kingdom, you discover the long-lost group and find out they were pretty chill, and actually just wanted to be on their own. It's a lost history. Maybe all the goat-like designs are actually just ceremonial garb, and some of the designs aren't even goat-like, they're just weird. And another maybe is that maybe they were the original branch, but they got real tired of working and went off to be sky hippies. I would have preferred that over what we got, even though it's already contradictory, it's just ever so slightly contradictory, and you can write it off as the Sheikah trying to make the Zonai look bad, because they already tried to make them look bad in the lore for no reason. You know, now that I broke all this down, can anyone name to me a character that's truly integral to the plot? Like, you can just go from jumping off the Sky Island all the way to the final boss. Other than Link or Zelda, can you name to me a character that has any more than a flat character arc in this entry? Sure, a flat character arc isn't bad, but I can't. And many of the champions didn't really need that treatment. The rule of sequels here is living up to its name, and it's very rare for games to have this problem. Usually a sequel is a distinct improvement in the video game industry, but this is actually way worse. I saw tons of reviews saying that if you don't like Breath of the Wild, you wouldn't like this, and it's true. But there's a really good chance that if you liked Breath of the Wild, you might still dislike this entry, because everything new aside from the gameplay sucks or has no reason to exist. The only character I remember as being distinct is Teba's kid, and that's just because I really dislike him that much. Why is it such a problem that almost no one makes any impact? Actually, wait, let me take a step back and correct something. Well, not technically correct, more so directly state to you all that Zelda has duologies and trilogies in it. Did you know that A Link to the Past is a trilogy? It has 3 games, one being a direct Satellaview sequel that is canon as far as I know, and almost entirely lost to time. It also has a 3DS sequel. All of these are actually well written and really good games. And sure, they're a bit hampered by older design and modern day, but they're still quite good. Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and Twilight Princess are all good games, and they follow each other chronologically. Even if Majora's Mask is kind of by itself, it's still in that part of the timeline. So looking at this, I just don't get how they could mess up this badly. It's clearly not actually a problem with sequels for the series. All the new lore implementation is terrible, and Nintendo just ignores the lore when they need the plot to happen. They regularly ignore the rules they created for their own universe just because. And I'm not talking about the rest of the series, I'm talking about this game on its lonesome. The rest of the series, for the most part, doesn't have this problem except in a few small instances. This game is always going to be fun, and the gameplay was clearly the focus, but even on close analysis and thought about it, I could cut my playtime by 20 to 30 hours, maybe 20 to 40 hours if I didn't have to grind for ores, and it would be a much more enjoyable experience. As a kind of side note, since I am tone deaf as hell, I do have to talk about the music, and it is for sure amazing. But only the returning or remix tracks. I like one new song in the whole game, and that's really bad. Everything else is neutral. Music is at least a fundamental matter of opinion. Even if the music isn't made well, it can still sound good. So I don't care too much about that. You guys tell me if you liked it in the comments below, I guess. This video is going on long enough. I'm not gonna break that down. There's just so much inconsequential text in the game that leads absolutely nowhere or means nothing. The voice acting highlights this a lot, because most of the voices are, while high quality, needing of better direction. The voice actors I know are good voice actors. Really, they are. I don't know how or why they're required to exhale half their lung capacity with every spoken line. Did the director for it go, add more feeling to it until they were audibly exhaling? Because this is a thing, almost every spoken line stays in my memory, not because they're good, but because they're You know, why did every single companion you gain completely ignore the obvious solution right in front of them? Yunobo could have entirely avoided the series of events if he just thought out what he did. Riju could have had one of her trusted guards help her train with her arrows, instead of waiting for Link to arrive. Teba's kid could have just died in the blizzard. Sidon could have just looked up slightly. I'm not kidding with any of these except for the dead kid one. The one for Teba's kid could have easily been solved if they worked with the kid to create a strong enough gust to climb up over time to the Wind Temple. I should just call it the Wind Dungeon, it doesn't deserve being called a temple. And I know they could have done this because I had little to no issue and I can't even fly, I just glide. The glider would be pulled away if it was working properly. Instead you just get some slight air resistance. Every single reason a potential companion has an issue, it's entirely solvable without you if they just think it out. The only exception is Minoru, who requires outside help to even get anything done, but that's engineered by her and it could have been avoided if she was already placed in the construct. Just none of it is reasonable. Why are there so many armors and items that have to be useless? Why do thickly padded snow boots with a matching set of pants not provide cold resistance? Actually, on that same note, someone pointed out to me that armors that provide cold attack bonuses or elemental attack bonuses or elemental attack resistances don't provide a resistance to that element itself. That's a pretty huge oversight, and it's a carryover from Breath of the Wild. Why is the upgrade for the Miner's Sit glowing footsteps? No matter how much I love this armor, bright blooms are everywhere, and by the end of the game I had over 700 of them. Why do half the sits in the game provide you with a direct attack bonus, almost all of them being exactly the same? The only one worth regularly wearing is the Barbarian Sit, because it also reduces stamina consumption for charge attacks. Why didn't the Phantom armor from Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks boost your defenses and shield durability? That's so entirely reasonable. Why is that the only alright elemental attack bonus armor sit, the Electric armor? Why does the Glide Suit decrease and or stop fall damage? You're not going to need it by the time you max out your stamina, because if you're already falling from the sky because you ran out of stamina for whatever reason, you can just press X again and it stops all your fall damage, even if you're like 1 centimeter from the ground, because the physics engine is just perfect. Why do the Sage Spirits have the same weights as their fleshy counterparts? I noticed when flying around that the sages can weigh you down with the same force as their fleshy counterparts. I'm serious. Going into the menu and disabling Yunobo every time I fly is tedious as hell and not really useful. Why do I have to run around and poke at sages to use their powers, and why isn't it on the L button radial or the D-pad? Why is an incredibly important button slot delegated to the map? You already have another button dedicated to the map that's much faster. You just press the minus button, or you press down L and select the map from the radial. Something I've never done on purpose but have done accidentally several times. This stinks of a cut power or them not thinking out another power that could be there. I did actually Google this because this was bothering me so much, and I found a Reddit thread where most of the posts agree with me on this one. Some people in that Reddit thread also pointed out how useless horses are now that you have Zonidor. And I didn't think about that at first, but I used my horse once in the whole game. I then abandoned it in a field in favor of flight. Later, I added it to my personal house because it deserves happiness. In that suit though, why do we need the towing harness, and why is the whistle itself bound to the D-pad? Jumping from high ledges with a QTE just seems to be showy and delays your glider. It also frustrates me at the start of the game. Most of those jumps you can avoid, but some you just can't. It's, albeit harmless, just annoying. Coordinates are a cool addition, but they're only good for communicating your location with others. It makes me wonder if we're going to get a multiplayer update in this game or something, but they aren't really necessary for showing anything off that screenshots of the map wouldn't just show where you also are. It's just added fluff, and it takes even longer to type up than uploading a screenshot, unless you're not dyslexic like I am. I suppose it's an extra yet unnecessary and far less precise option, because coordinates only change if you're moving with them, and they change sometimes rapidly and inconsistently. It's poorly made and poorly calibrated, so sometimes finding the area listed for the coordinates can be a bit of a task. There are way too many minute things here for me to call this thought out. Many of the new ideas and new characters feeling more than a bit half-baked. Even some of the old ideas that weren't fixed between games, even with fan demand to do so. It feels more like they carried everything over from Breath of the Wild they could without much thought put into it because it was easy. Or maybe the fans would be upset. I know I would be, considering so much of everything else is the same, so I'll give them credit there. Sure, I love that these things are here though. It's awesome to be able to use them, but it needs to be better than this because they're clearly just copied over. It's been 6 years from the last title, and none of the above issues should exist because they've had 6 years to brainstorm ways to fix or change things. But the additions themselves are nothing but fluff, or some of the items and even characters got even worse between entries. Some things got worse just by not changing because they were made redundant between titles. I could have excused this if it was a DLC for Breath of the Wild like it was originally planned. You know, why did this need to be a sequel? One of the later game quests just has a reward telling you the plot you already know, because it told you when the game started, and the worst part of this is, in order to get this quest, you only need the Zora armor apparently, at least I'm told. That might not be true, so take that with a grain of salt. So you could get this right away and get this repeated to you immediately for really no reward. That's just being poorly written and lazy. Why is this title $70 US? Why is it 90 Canadian dollars? I don't know how much it is in other countries. I'm only familiar with these two price points, but they're more like pain points. This pricing is too much. I would honestly say this is maybe worth $30 to $40 due to not only content reuse, but clear intellectual dishonesty towards the player. It could have stayed a DLC, but big fans are gonna fight back against this. No matter how many times I say I actually enjoyed this game, people are gonna say that I hate it because I have criticisms for it. There was more than one person I was talking to saying I just wanted all the new additions removed, but I don't. I just want them to do better. I've noticed this growing line in the sand between Nintendo fans and literally anyone else. I always jokingly called Nintendo the Apple of video game developers, but every passing year I feel more and more that that's actually true now, as it becomes an exclusive club of devout users who refuse any criticisms and excuse their loyalty with it just being how it is. I'm a huge Nintendo fan, but I can still criticize them and offer criticisms to the company because I want things to be better. It really feels like between entries, people didn't learn the problems. There was a group of people that just got down on their knees and went, "Oh my god, this is perfect, thank you, this is a 10 out of 10 experience." And then this one came out and they went, "Oh no, this is the perfect experience, it's 10 out of 10, I can't possibly replace it." But even if I agree with people on these problems existing, if I openly criticize it, those same people will criticize me over it, a lot of the time at least. I haven't encountered that recently because I've been trying to avoid those fan bases because they, like I said, they ruined my experience initially. Because I wanted this game to be good, and once more, I do think it's good and I think it's fun, it just has so many flaws, and it makes me far less hyped for new entries in the series, even though I would be excited to see more. Nintendo just cared so little about the story, the characters, and the world, all things I value highly, and went full into open world without any consideration of any of that, the story just being a thing to further expand open world segments. But also not entirely that, because they do require you complete some of the story to get the game and the full open world, which is why speedruns aren't quite the same as Breath of the Wild's speedrun times. It was a lot better when you could just skip it all and go to the final boss and mash A to win, because I loved that and most people loved that. Sure, there wasn't much direction, but 100 reminders of where to go is just as annoying, and by forcing us to experience a portion of the story, you force us to experience how bad it is. Every time I engaged with the story, I genuinely disliked the game more. But once more, hardcore Nintendo fans aren't going to budge on this. They're gonna pay the exorbitant prices for less quality because no one does what Nintendo does. While that's true, sometimes that's not a good thing. As a big fan, their practices can be kind of predatory. I mentioned it way earlier, literally almost 2 months ago in my writing. But they've done terrible things to dedicated fans, and hardcore fans have done terrible things to other fans of the same Nintendo products, just to defend them. These actions shouldn't be acceptable, but in the current landscape of people too tired to care, they are, and it's becoming bigger, and that's sad. After I showed this to some other people before putting this review out there, some of them pointed out that this is a regular thing Nintendo does. For some reason, citing Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time, I mean, I guess it's kind of comparable, but not wholly. See, Majora's Mask was made within a very short period, under 2 years, I believe. Breath of the Wild 2 took 6 years. Sure, if you want to be pedantic, it took 4 years. But that's still way more than enough time to make a brand new, solid entry. I've referenced Fallout New Vegas a lot, but that was made in under 10 months, I think? As another reminder for another game Nintendo kind of did this for, Mario Galaxy 2 was supposed to be an expansion of Mario Galaxy 1 before it became its entire own game. Development time on that title took 2.5 years, and it's still far less broken with so many more improvements off of the first game. There's also Link's crossbow training, but I don't want to talk about that game. What Nintendo did here is bad, and it's not really comparable to past games in the series, or games in other series, because this took 6 years to make, and came out as bad as it did. Critically, this isn't an awful game, and yeah, you can still get the game and enjoy it, as it's a fundamentally opinionated medium on if you find it enjoyable. I'm not stopping you. I'm not going to try and stop you. Goodness knows, I keep telling everyone I actually like this game and the gameplay is insanely fun, but everyone keeps saying I hate it. I don't know how many more times I need to say I like this game for people to actually understand I like it. I just have criticisms of it that I wanted it to be better after waiting 6 years. I'm just here to criticize the problems with it, because criticism isn't actually a dirty word. After all, there are things you can be critical of but still enjoy the product. I mean, some people do enjoy the worst games ever made from a critical standpoint and in an unironic sense. I miss the days before fanbaiting where I could be critical about a subject without getting threats or harassment or people just saying I'm wrong because they had fun anyways. I guarantee you Nintendo's not going to address anything in this except for maybe a few things here and there, because addressing them brings highlights to them, which gives them flack and detracts from sales and gives you more critical thoughts. If you ignore it, you validate the people that will rapidly consume your product, because then it's not an issue. I don't care if there's extended lore outside the game that explains these things to you or builds them up. It should be in the game, no matter how many companies do this kind of thing, where they explain their mess in a follow-up and they retcon it or expand the lore. It doesn't make it better. It just means they realized it and fixed it posthumously. That's still bad. They're acknowledging it's bad. They're just not telling you directly. This is of course not a commentary on extended lore itself, as I do like quite a bit of extended lore. It's more commentary on the fact that they'll ignore it or brush it away with extended lore instead of addressing it to try and make it better. I mean, why did Ganon explode in a giant thermonuclear blast? It harkens back to the careless plot of Godzilla films. But at least I go to Godzilla films for their lack of plot and the giant monster fights. Why were the dragon bodies also unable to handle turning properly? I don't think the physics or nodes of the dragons were made for this. I had them intertwine at one point and it was awesome, and I hoped it would keep doing that, but it didn't stay that way. Actually, the whole fight could have been better by putting Link on the back pedal, because I didn't feel like I was on the back pedal at all. I felt more like Frieza unlocking his later forms and Goku just tanking him to the face. But yeah, that's it. I don't think this game is worth it. Maybe if they sold it digitally for way less. Like Xenoblade Chronicles, Toward in the Golden Country. That was great. It was a standalone game and a DLC. And it's way cheaper than getting Xenoblade Chronicles 2 by itself because it doesn't have as much game to it. Tears of the Kingdom just isn't worth it because of the price tag, and I say that definitively. It's not a matter of opinion. You can get it and enjoy it and think you're having a great time, but looking at it critically, this is upcharged way too much. This is outright disrespecting fans, and that's sad that they're getting away with it. I personally paid double the price of what I think it's worth. They peeled away so many of the best qualities of the series, and even the one that came right before this, to be so wildly appealing and so non-complex. I get why, but it robs people of opportunities to be drip-fed into the series, like Fire Emblem Engage, which I also think is bad, but it at least unlocks the ability for other people to get into the games. This is a lost business opportunity as much as it is a lost opportunity for the fans. I wanted this game to be good, and while I went into it and I had a fun time, so it's good in the fun factor, I came out feeling that it was tedious and intellectually dishonest to the player. It'll give you these massive lore dumps and then entirely disregard them. It makes you grind for hours and hours and hours on end to get everything. And sometimes you have to go on these grinding trips just to get what you need to get to the next area. And just because it gets easier to grind doesn't make it not grinding. Not that grinding is bad, it's just that the way you grind in this game feels unnatural. The way the game sometimes forces you to progress in a specific way feels wrong. There's also the fact that I didn't talk about, but no one I meet can agree on how the physics engine for this game is supposed to work. I've been accused of glitching and breaking the game because I take fall damage. This physics engine does not work properly. No matter what anyone out there tells you, there is something wrong with it, but no one can agree on what. And I believe Nintendo agrees with this assessment. Currently, the game regularly goes on sale for as low as $40, and typically it's between $48 and $52. Nintendo knows this is a problem, and they want to get those hesitant on the game to get the game. And they can afford to sell it that low for a profit. The price is being lowered drastically. It's almost like the original price listed for this title isn't the real price they want you to pay for it. I was assured by so many people it wouldn't go on sale for under $60 for a very long time, that it would remain at full price. But less than a month in, it went on sale for $50. And like I said, now it gets as low as $40. I think the price on this is going to continue to drop. And that's a good thing. That is a good thing in general, as it makes the game more accessible, but it also reaches the actual price point the game should be worth. If your argument is that we should stop being critical or thinking about the medium, why are you even here? Were you hoping for someone to reinforce those beliefs? We're kind of wired to care about things like this, so it's weird if you don't have anything like it. Why care about anything intangible to your touch then? It's fine and good to care about things you enjoy and be invested in their continuation and development. It's not a series you typically turn off your brain to have fun with. But I guess that's where it's going now. Sure, it was fun to be able to do that, but it wasn't the whole talking point. And as a last reminder, this is brought to you by a company that's also willing to sue people for being their fans and downloading games that aren't available anymore, but they act as if it's losing them millions in damages, which is one day going to happen to this title, where it's going to become completely unavailable, and fan projects to keep it available are going to be blasted to oblivion. This isn't me saying you can't enjoy this game by any means. I enjoyed it as well, and it's thanks to genuinely good fans that I think it's loads of fun, because they helped me to find ways to enjoy it. The open world is amazing, the collectathon is alright, and I absolutely love the graphics and vistas. I just have criticisms, as I believe most people should, especially in a medium that's grown as big as this. Thank you guys for watching. If you like my stuff, you know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe, check my Patreon and Ko-fi in the description below, but now you can also join my channel through a channel membership and get all my videos early. I know what it's like to be poor, so I started them all off at 99 cents, and the next level up is $2.99, and it does the exact same thing. That is the best way to support me, actually. That and coffee. I appreciate everything you guys can give me, and it helps push forward for me being able to do this continuously. And God knows I need to make up for the money I spent on this game.